Chapter 798. In the long silence, Huaisher looked at her blankly. After a long while, he asked in confusion, "What's that?" "Main mission. Was there such a thing?" Huaisher widened his eyes. "I've never seen you give out a side mission. Is it inconvenient for you to understand? Old Fong, I want happy water and roasted chicken wings." As soon as she got home, she didn't hold back at all. She collapsed on the sofa and ordered supper. She even took out half a bag of potato chips from the cupboard. She had shrunk a lot. She almost turned into a cute version of herself. "I went on a long trip. I'm so tired. It's so troublesome." Tangi rolled on the sofa. "Home is still the best. I can eat and sleep. The happy water even fills me up." Huaisher held the cup numbly and took a sip expressionlessly. He really didn't want to remind her, "This is my F***king home." He rolled his eyes and asked, "So, did you get anything from the trip?" "Nothing at all. The outside world is so cold. Even the happy water is exhaling. Only Old Fong's roasted chicken wings are warm." Tangi lay on the sofa and looked at Fong Shu operating the oven in the kitchen. She rubbed her hands in anticipation. Huaisher originally wanted to ask her if she could think of anything other than food. But after thinking about it, he realized that she really could. In order to prevent her from thinking about anything else, he could only force the topic back on track. "So main mission. What's the main mission?" "It's about our great advancement." Tangi flipped over from the sofa and made her cute version of herself in a very charming position. It was as if she had entered into a commentary mode. "Level 3, great. Seeming sounds awesome, but he's still a level 3. Those below level 4 are cannon fodder and crafting tools. Even if you have divinity protecting you, you still have to answer when a missile comes. The War of the Worlds is on the way. You have to hurry up and improve." The War of the Worlds was a great war in hell that came with the tide of the abyss. Almost all of the infernal realm above the Silent Zone was involved in the large-scale turmoil, which could almost be called an abyssal insurrection. Under the influence of the tide, which was once in 100 years, the depths of all hells would undergo drastic changes. Living together and separating, when the time came, all territories would be reorganized. Meanwhile, the slaughter between the countless abyssal forces would push this bitter struggle to its climax. At the same time, it was also the time when the pressure from the 3 great seals was the greatest. In order to maintain the stability of the present world, the Astronomical Association and the various major lineages would also participate in this dispute. Even without mentioning the long list of titles, Huaisher, as the recently popular fried chicken of the Ivory Tower, could not avoid this. Tangi replied, "According to the Continuation Court's estimates, the prelude to the War of the Worlds will begin in about half a year's time. At that time, the rulers will most likely start a new round of war." Huaisher calmly held his teacup and said, "But what does this have to do with my little Huaisher from the Ivory Tower? I have turned over a new leaf and am now teaching and educating people. Benefactress, please return." "Are you sure?" Tangi looked at him with a faint smile. "I don't mind, but the situation is more important than the person, you understand?" Huaisher rolled his eyes. Tangi was right. When the time came, Huaisher would probably be involved in all kinds of situations, even if he was unwilling. Moreover, maintaining popularity came with a price, whether it was the idol business or other things. He had to be prepared early. Aren't I still enduring and waiting for the 3-year promise? So, the most important thing now is to deal with the reconstruction of the Dambwa Inner Circle. This will be good for you, the Dambwa Inner Circle, and the Ivory Tower. The strengthening of the Dambwa Inner Circle would be corrected, and the growth of the Great Arbiter of Destiny would restore Huaisher's incomplete divinity, speeding up the killing in the ultimate. The faster it was done, The sooner it was done, the better Huaishi's condition would be. Then you can prepare for Yun Zhongjuan's advancement ceremony. Tangyi reminded him abruptly. Huaishi shuddered. It's time to spend money again. He was panicking. Don't worry, don't worry. You're not the same as before. Tangyi comforted him. Look at you. You've made a fortune in Yingzhou. Your business is doing so well. Your life is not bad. And the Ivory Tower and the Astronomy Association are protecting you. It was a nice thing to say, but he felt that something was not quite right. Was there a second half that this bad thing did not say? In short, a little bit of money is not a problem at all. Tangyi patted his shoulder and comforted him. With your level of corruption, no one will be able to tell that you're faking the accounts. Do I need it? Isn't this just an example? Right. Tangyi said, it's not like I'm asking you to embezzle. Let's get down to business. Huaishi sighed and took out a small notebook. What should I spend money on next? The others are not expensive, but there are a few things that are not easy to get. Tangyi pondered for a moment and said, first of all, money, large amounts of source crystals, and alchemy materials are indispensable. These should not be a problem. I can get them with just my face. Huaishi said, just tell me the things that are not easy to get. Then here's the problem. Tangyi shrugged. There are a total of 2 rank 4 on the Road of Heaven's Inquisition. The Great Siming that grew from young Siming, and the Yun Zhongjuan that grew from Xiangjun, but you're already a rank 3 Great Siming. It's not realistic to rely on the divinity of Great Siming to break through to rank 4, so the only path left is Yun Zhongjuan. But this is where the problem lies. You don't have Xiangjun's sacred mark in your body. Huaishi was stunned. Only then did he realize what the problem was. That's right, he turned from an Yin soul into a Li soul, then into a mountain ghost, and then into a young Siming. Originally, he should have become a Great Siming as a rank 4, but he used the opportunity in advance. Then there was only one other path left. Li's soul into Hebo, into Xiangjun, and finally into the true Yin Zhongjuan. But now that he was a Great Siming, how could he erase his sacred mark and delete his account for this? Now you regret using up Huaizi's divine mark, right? Tangyi gloated. Originally, the substitute not only helped you withstand the pressure of divinity and the corrosion of hell, but also carried the power of Great Siming so that your original body could cultivate Xiangjun's sacred mark from the beginning. But in the end, it was used as a consumable by you. Now that you want to use it, are you blind? Do you regret it? Huaishi rolled his eyes. He did not want to talk to her. Then what should we do? He said, let's just go to bed. I haven't seen you for a few days, and you've become so unrestrained. Tangyi was stunned and said with a complicated expression, Huaishi, I'm not such a casual woman. At least, don't we have to cultivate feelings first? Let's start by holding hands, okay? Huaishi took a deep breath and put the axe of wrath back in. He restrained his impulse to kill this black-hearted woman and tried hard to squeeze out a gentle smile. Can we talk about something serious? You were the one who was not serious first. Yes, it's me. I was wrong. Huaishi lowered his head and begged, please, let's talk about something serious, okay? Okay. Tangyi sighed helplessly and magnanimously forgave Huaishi's little mistake. After all, she was a good person. It's not that there's no way. Look, you planted watermelons in your field, and there's no place to plant cabbages, but that doesn't stop you from getting other people's cabbages. What are you talking about? The stigmata relic. Tangyi said lightly, since you can't get Xiangjuan's stigmata, you can get her stigmata relic directly, right? The only difference is whether it's in your body or not. This is the easiest thing to get, and there must be some miraculous crystals of the road of heaven's inquisition. It's just a matter of whether it's always been compatible or not. When the time comes, suitable one, it'll be like a USB Russell must have searched all over the world. Isn't it good to plug it in and use it? Xiangjuan's stigmata was not the most difficult thing to get. The most difficult thing was the way for Xiangjuan to become Yun Zhongjuan and the materials needed. The stigmata relic was only the prerequisite. The external conditions were more demanding, and it required a catastrophic rainstorm that lasted for more than 7 days. Also, there were precious materials that contained the destiny and divinity of the sea and the sky. The process of ascension from the ground to the clouds was extremely difficult, not to mention the way to merge the stigmata of Yun Zhongjuan and Great Seeming into the same soul. There's a way to find Xiangjuan's stigmata relic. Don't worry, just wait. Although it's difficult to find a disaster rainstorm that lasts for more than 7 days, it's not impossible to find. Unfortunately, it must be limited to the current situation. Otherwise, there are plenty of places in the border that have rainfall all year round. Tangi concluded, there are only 2 things you need to pay attention to: the divinity materials needed for Xiangjuan to become Yun Zhongjuan, and the remaining crystals of the spring of light. These 2 things, one is related to the achievement of Yun Zhongjuan, and the other is related to the fusion of Yun Zhongjuan and Great Seeming. Both of them must be discovered by you, and they are necessities related to your destiny. Understood. I have to work hard again, right? Huai sure couldn't help but have a headache after remembering the important things. What's the spring of light? Where is it? It's said to be the last relic left from the Age of Gods, and its location is extremely confidential. How would I know where it is? Tangi shrugged calmly. Isn't it because you've been too lazy recently? So I've arranged a long-term goal for you. The most important thing now is to settle the inner circle of Donbo first. Work hard to improve the happiness of the residents and become a qualified player of SimCity. The steaming hot chicken wings were finally served on the table. Tangi beamed with joy and then glanced at Huaishur. But be careful, someone wants to share the cake. She sniffed the rich aroma on the plate and sighed softly. After all, although not everyone knows how to plant trees, when the fruit is good, everyone wants to take a share. Huaishur looked down at the email notification that popped up on his phone. He raised his eyebrows. He didn't say anything. Chapter 799. At midnight, Shiro Ueno, the department manager of the Huai Paper Group, was arrested and searched by the Metropolitan Police Department because he was involved in a murder case. At 2:00, Lin Shurjiu, who had received the news, hurried over with his lawyer. He sat in the office of the Metropolitan Police Department and looked down at the cheap coffee in front of him. He then looked up at the class director in front of him. Our Huai Paper Construction is a mature and legal construction company under the Huai Paper Group. As the department manager, Shiro Ueno's character is well known and has won the unanimous praise of his colleagues. For so many years, he has been conscientious, hardworking. His down-to-earth, sincere, gentle, and kind character has been recognized by everyone. Now that he has suffered such an unjust injustice, our society will definitely not turn a blind eye to it. At the end of the day, it's all because the Metropolitan Police Department made a mistake, which led to the current situation. I don't know if there's a mistake, but I've heard of Shiro Ueno many times. The class director calmly drank his coffee. He's a shark man. He's very fierce and powerful. He's been imprisoned twice for violent activities and has been involved in countless crimes. He was originally a general of the Fujimoto Group, but now he's the confidant of your Huai Paper Group's leader. I know this very well. There's no need for you to introduce him to me. I don't know what you're talking about. Forrest Hutt looked behind him. This is our company's lawyer, Kuraki. We request to meet with Shiro Ueno immediately. Sorry, Shiro Ueno is currently being examined. The class director replied, Our examination department has extracted blood traces from his hand. He's a major suspect. Kuraki pushed up his glasses. As a construction company, injuries and disasters are inevitable. Manager Ueno often leads the workers on the front lines. An occasional injury to his hand isn't a big deal, and it doesn't mean anything. We've extracted the DNA of 2 victims from the blood traces. When the construction materials were being transported, the bodies of cats and dogs were found on the roadside. Shouldn't they be moved to the side? Kuraki looked at the watch on his wrist. You have no right to stop me from meeting my client. I suspect that you're using torture to extort a confession from him for your own performance. You're trying to frame him and other unspeakable motives. Are you trying to scare me? Kuraki, you don't have to put a hat on me. I've seen a lot of scumbag lawyers like you who defend gangs for money. The dean sneered and picked up his phone to say a few words. Soon, there was a knock on the door. The handcuffed Ueno was escorted in and sat on a chair. Aren't you going to meet? He's here. You can meet him for as long as you want, and you can say whatever you want. The dean put down the cup in his hand. The Metropolitan Police Department has enough coffee today. No matter how much swill there is, it's not something that can be eaten, sir. The cabin in the forest said indifferently, You keep saying that we are scum, but the things you do are not much better than scum. That's where the problem lies. The provost shrugged and straightened his back from his chair. He leaned forward and sneered. Even if we are scum, we are still legal scum. Don't compare me to a bunch of gutter rats like you. The Metropolitan Police Department is a place that specializes in dealing with trash like you. The coffee in the Metropolitan Police Department is specifically used to feed scum like you, swill. Rats can only eat swill, so don't think about eating other things. Is that so? Lin Shurgio was expressionless. You seem to have nothing to fear. Is there someone behind you? It doesn't matter. Maybe you have a strong background, but you definitely don't know who I am. He shrugged slightly and said regretfully, Otherwise, you definitely wouldn't dare to talk to me like this. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the new issue of the Twilight News suddenly reported that the Metropolitan Police Department was investigating the provost of the 3rd provost for accepting bribes and being involved in several murder cases. Under the influence of the mastermind behind the scenes, the news began to spread like wildfire. In the afternoon of the same day, Huaisher finally met an unscheduled guest in his office. In the current era, an old man with a head full of white hair was sitting on his sofa, wearing an old-fashioned Ingzhou robe. On the ring on his index finger was the emblem of the Danii family, representing the identity of the visitor. He was a member of the Chinese Danii family from the looming mansion. On the business card was the title of the Metropolitan Police Department's security officer. In the MPD, the security officer was responsible for the security of the Imperial Palace. It could be said that it was the backbone of the government. Doera Shengjian. Only black tea can do it. Huaisher sat opposite him and motioned for his secretary to make tea. After the greetings, he wasn't in a hurry to speak. He sat calmly and waited for the old man opposite him to speak. Soon, the tea was served. It's good tea. Doera Shengjian sighed. Yes, it's suitable for old people. Drink more and don't have to be afraid of insomnia, Huaisher said to his secretary. When you leave later, bring a few kilograms back for Mr. Doera. There's no need for tea. It's better to drink plain water when you're old. Doera raised his eyes and looked over, suddenly saying, This time you've gone too far. Huaisher Kuan. I'm also in a difficult position. Sorry, I don't quite understand what you're talking about. Huaisher's expression didn't change. Behind Doera, the attendant opened a document bag and pushed the investigation of the crime scene and photos in front of Huaisher. Daiso Kosho and Yevgeny both died in front of their general's old residence. They were nailed to the door and died of blood loss. Doera asked, "Do you have any clues?" "I'm not sure. I've never seen these two people before." Huaisher shrugged regretfully. "You should know my style. I don't like to leave people with intact corpses. However, since these two people are dead, I think they most likely died for a reason, right? To tell you the truth, after I heard about it, I can eat 2 more bowls of rice tonight and add an extra dish. Don't talk about that nonsense. Huaisher, Kuan, everyone knows who did this." Doera sighed. "You've broken the balance. The underworld of Kyoto is already chaotic enough. To be honest, I thought that the high and mighty looming hall wouldn't care about the life and death of rats." Huaisher calmly replied, "Isn't punishing evil and promoting good the obligation of Kyoto's citizens? Looming Hall should really give such a kind person a banner." "A banner? That kind of thing. You can have as many sides as you want." Doera suddenly laughed. "I didn't come today to criticize you, Mr. Huaisher. We don't want to make things too stiff with our neighbors. Entrepreneur of the Year, honorary senator, these can all be considered. With your achievements, you can even have the emperor award you a medal. As long as you want, it doesn't matter even if you have a position in Looming Hall. You already did this in the rookie competition, right? Sorry, things have changed with the passage of time. I'm not interested." Huaisher held his chin and lazily replied, "I think it's pretty good to lead the ivory tower. You see, at least I'm in charge of such a large area right now. I'm too busy. There are also many people to feed, right?" Doera said, "In my opinion, the Alliance doesn't need to give up its current advantage, right? We don't mind the Alliance expanding its territory. A stable underground world is also something we're happy to see." He paused for a moment and said meaningfully, "We can even help build the Dambwa district. After all, we're both on Ingzhou land. We have to help each other. It's always been to persuade prostitutes to turn over a new leaf. Where's the logic of persuading people to do evil, Mr. Doera?" After a long silence, Huaisher sighed and raised his head. "This isn't the way to hitch a ride, right?" Doera smiled. "We're both in Ingzhou. We're just looking for cooperation." Huaisher asked expressionlessly, "What if I don't need cooperation?" After a short silence, Doera sighed. "If you're too domineering, you won't have friends. Huaisher Kuan." "It doesn't matter," Huaisher said. "I've never had many friends." Doera thought for a moment and seriously told him, "Without friends, it's hard to move an inch." Huaisher smiled. In the silence, he slowly raised his hand and opened the blinds beside him, letting in the dazzling sunlight to show the noisy scene in the inner circle of Danbwa. "Do you see the road outside, Mr. Doera?" Huaisher asked doubtfully. "It's so flat and spacious. As long as you don't get lost, how can it be difficult to walk?" As he spoke, his smile became gentler and indescribably brilliant, but his eyes became dark, and it was difficult to restrain the evil thoughts surging in his soul. Wisps of blood appeared in his eyes. "The road led to the sky. If I don't want to go to Rome, I can go to other places. You can do whatever you want as long as you don't block my way. Don't even think about it." In the silence, the corner of Doera's eyes twitched. Soon, he sighed helplessly. "Then we have nothing to talk about." The old man slowly got up and patted the dust on his knees. "I wish you a safe journey, Mr. Huaisher. And I wish you good health, too." Huaisher smiled and got up to send him off. "I also hope that the people we care about will be safe and sound." Doera's footsteps paused for a moment. He finally raised his turbid eyes and looked at Huaisher. The 2 pairs of eyes looked at each other for a long time. Then They nodded in silence. I believe you will. He closed the door behind him and walked away. In the silence, the cold tea reflected a dark red light in the afternoon sun. Huaisher leaned on the sofa, the heavy pen spinning silently at his fingertips. His expression was indifferent. Sensei, Mr. Ueno has been granted bail. Soon, a call came from Forest Hut. But he can't leave the country or leave the present. He has to be ready to cooperate with their investigation at any time. Okay, I understand. Thank you for your hard work. Also, Sensei, Forest Hut hesitated for a moment. My sixth granduncle might not have any good intentions. The Six Directions Association has investigated this matter more than once, so I'm quite clear about this. Huaisher replied, Don't worry. If I didn't trust you, I wouldn't have put you in that position. After hanging up the phone, Huaisher returned to his desk and looked down at the notepad in front of him. After a long time, he raised his hand and crossed out a few of the lines. In fact, there was nothing wrong with a win-win cooperation. But on what basis? At this point, they still came to the door with a show of strength, hoping that Doomsday Inner Circle would be their rat and eat the swill they gave them in their dreams. For a long time, the leaders of the alliance had put in so much effort to lay the foundation and pave the road for the arrival of this day. They couldn't turn back to the past just because someone was blocking in front of them, right? Want to cooperate. Of course, if Doomsday Inner Circle wanted to grow, they couldn't eat alone. Everyone had to make money for the business to last. But there were so many people in the world who could cooperate with me. Why would I choose your looming hall? Huaisher sneered. Do you really think you have me? Chapter 800. Did he really think that the ivory towers methods would work in Ingzhou? In the car that left, Tatora Seiji hung up the phone and sneered. Soon, the phone lit up again. Mr. Tatora, this is the Inner Palace. A low voice came from the phone. How did Mr. Huaisher respond? In the end, he's still a young man who doesn't care about anyone else. His aggressive personality can't be changed without some setbacks. That style will only make him lose the favor of more people. Tatora Seiji replied, As you expected, he's not easy to get in touch with. It seems that he's Russell's student. The Inner Palace side, on the other end of the phone. He's exactly the same as Russell 50 years ago. He's aggressive and never leaves any leeway. But Doomsday's matters can't be solved with aggression. No matter how great the Ivory Tower's authority is, if they want to use it on Ingzhou's soil, they have to be discounted. Now, if the now was so easy to settle down, we wouldn't have to wait until today. Although the now was big, there wasn't an inch of extra land. This wasn't something that could be solved with murder and arson. Blindly arrogant and arrogant, not knowing how to compromise and cooperate, would only lead to self-destruction. Moreover, this was the capital, an important town in the Ingzhou pedigree. How could they allow an outsider to be so domineering? Do we need to take further action? Tatora Seiji asked. There's no need. The Inner Palace said, Doomsday's Inner Circle is already a foregone conclusion. We don't need to go against the Astronomy Association, and we don't need to let people talk about us. He said, we don't need to oppose. As long as we don't support him, he won't be able to do anything. The phone hung up. Tatora Seiji closed his eyes and didn't say anything. Gradually, they went further and further away. For Huaisher, friction with the Ingzhou pedigree was to be expected. In the heart of the Ingzhou pedigree in the capital, if an organization wanted to exist, they couldn't avoid dealing with the Ingzhou pedigree. In fact, in the original plan, even if they wanted to cooperate, Huaisher could pinch his nose and bear with it. But cooperation wasn't the way to cooperate. First of all, it had to be based on the premise that both sides were equal. It couldn't be a condescending gift or have ulterior motives. The way to cooperate was to have a clear priority. Otherwise, it would just be one-sided oppression and control. If they were to cooperate today, wouldn't the looming hall be protected by troops tomorrow? Was the Donbua Inner Circle going to pay for the military expenses the day after tomorrow? If there was any friction the day after tomorrow, would the Inner Circle of Donbua need to put in more effort and sweat? In your F*King dreams, if that really happened, Huaishur would rather throw his face into the abyss and stay in Xian High for the rest of his life. He was ready to trip up the looming hall. However, his opponent's speed seemed to be faster than he had imagined. The next morning, he received a message from the bank. The loan process was hindered. Among the lending banks, an East Asia Chungtong bank suddenly proposed a suspension of negotiations. The reason was that due to the recent changes in the exchange rate between pure gold and spirit crystals, which led to the continuous contraction of trade between the Asian border and other sudden situations, they needed to reevaluate the prospects of the Donbua Inner Circle. Due to the huge amount of loans required by the Donbua Inner Circle, they used the method of syndication loans. It was not a single bank, but a group of 7 banks led by the Magic Gold Bank and the Archean Fund. They shared the risks and provided loans to the Donbua Inner Circle. At this moment, the Chungtong Bank suddenly proposed to re-examine the evaluation information of the Donbua Inner Circle, which immediately interrupted the original negotiation process and put the loan on hold. And this international bank headquartered in Jakarta. The shareholders who held more than 20% of the shares were the Sakai conglomerate, and the actual controller behind the Sakai conglomerate was self-evident. You're in a hurry to trip me up so soon. Huaishur was amused. I'm sorry, Mr. Huaishur. The agent of the Magic Gold Bank shrugged helplessly. According to the procedure, they have the right to do so. If they insist on pestering you, your loan this time will be delayed for a long time, and we can't do anything about it. It was not that they could not do anything, but that they were unwilling to do anything. Only if Huaishur lowered her head would they be able to negotiate better terms. It's okay. I believe that the future is always bright, right? Huaishur replied with a smile. On behalf of the Donbua Inner Circle, I sincerely welcome your evaluation. It's only right for such a large sum of money. The dwarf of the Magic Gold Bank nodded. He could not tell whether Huaishur was speaking the truth or not, but it did not matter. Since an ally jumped out to attract the fire, they were happy to take advantage of it. With the size of the Magic Gold Bank, if Chungtong could take a bite, they could take more than 3. Why wouldn't he do it? Then, I wish you all the best. He politely said goodbye. In less than 2 hours, the rumor of the loan failure appeared out of thin air and spread to the entire Donbua Inner Circle and even Kyoto. It was as if it had grown legs and set off a new storm out of thin air. In an interview with the Tomorrow News, the spokesperson of the Archean Fund personally admitted to re-examining the prospects of the Donbua Inner Circle and re-evaluating the news. After that, the stocks of the allied industries, including Jingtong Electronics, began a new round of plunging. In a place like Yingzhou, where the stock market was like stagnant water for thousands of years, it was simply a miracle. It was just that no one wanted this kind of miracle. It was not just the investors. Soon, panic spread to the streets, and everyone was in a state of panic. That bastard Paperman had finished eating, drinking, and gambling. He had embezzled 1 billion yuan and was going to run away with his 9 sisters-in-law. Rumors spread like wildfire. Refute the rumors? Huaishur looked at the foot of the mountain in confusion. Why refute the rumors? There's no need. But if we let it go, what will happen if we let it go? Huaishur asked back. If they let it go, it would definitely cause turmoil, and there would be many seeds of chaos sprouting. These were self-evident things. But Aren't some people mistaken? Huaisher said softly, I am the leader of the alliance. I am the current king of Danbua. I came here to change everything for the better. I have already done so much at the foot of the mountain, but why do some people still think that I owe them? The foot of the mountain was silent, not daring to speak, and sweating profusely. Recently, with the changes in life, the impetuous atmosphere in the inner circle of Danbua was also rising visibly. Many people even began to call for more benefits and better treatment in the name of equality and justice. They even felt that the current changes were not enough and wanted better. But in fact, the changes in the inner circle of Danbua had never had anything to do with them. They had never even added a brick or tile to it. More people grasped the opportunity and began to work hard and struggle day and night. They were just waiting for the boat under there, but to move on its own. For Huaisher, this was not insatiable greed, and he did not feel betrayed. If it was human nature to love ease and hate work, then the bad atmosphere left behind by the inner circle of Danbua was far more than that. It was easy to change mountains and rivers, but hard to change one's nature. After getting used to the tragic life of the strong preying on the weak, there would always be some things left behind with pain and lessons. In fact, Huaisher was very surprised that things had come to this point. There were even some people spontaneously defending Huaisher's reputation. Even the construction on the site and the work in other places were not affected at all. The inner circle of Danbua was still operating as usual. So, we really can't let it go any longer. Huaisher stared out of the window at the noisy construction scene under the night sky. At least we can't let down those who trust us, right? It was true that some people were incurable, but this was not a reason to give up on more people. For the time being, there's no need to rush to refute the rumors. We just need to find those who forget who they are for a little money. If they don't like it here, there's no need to force them to stay. The world is so big, there's always a place that can satisfy them. Huaisher thought for a moment and said seriously, you work hard these days. Just keep an eye on it and maintain order. Remember, as long as there's no big trouble, the Huaisher group is not allowed to do anything. Understand? I know that some people are used to the life of the violent group, but violence is an outward weapon, not an inward tool. Times have changed, and so have the rules. Yamashita nodded respectfully. You've emphasized it many times, and the other members and I have kept it in mind. Very good. Huaisher nodded and said, help me call Little 19 over. I have something to say to him. Yamashita was right. At this juncture, they had to do something. For hours later, late at night, in the heart of the bustling streets of Kobe, the headquarters of the Sixth He Association was located. After 4 years, the cabin in the woods finally saw his sixth granduncle again. The legendary old dragon didn't look old at all. Rather, he was too young, as if he was only a few years older than him. His face was handsome, but his body was shockingly thin, as if he was just skin and bones. His white hair was mottled, and his eyes were dark without any white. Lin Wei was not afraid. As the half-brother of the current torch dragon, he was already 92 years old. Under his leadership, the Sixth He Association gradually developed into a smuggling organization that covered the entire East Asia and even infiltrated parts of America. Many people would have nightmares when they saw his gloomy face. Now he was full of a warm smile. Little 19 is here? Why didn't you say so earlier? The old man waved enthusiastically. Come, let Sixth Granduncle take a look. The cabin in the woods walked forward and smiled, allowing the old man to raise his hand and touch his shoulders and bones, just like when he was a child. You've become much stronger, Little 19. Sixth Granduncle smiled with relief. With your bones, you can live a long life unlike your brother. Unfortunately, the back of your head is not peaceful. He said, "You're rebellious." When he smiled, his smile was ferocious, and he looked down at the boy in front of him. The boy was also looking at him. Chapter 801. If you want to be successful, you have to learn from sixth granduncle. Letting evil karma's claws press on his vital parts, 19 answered calmly, "I also want to live a long life like sixth granduncle." "Ha ha ha ha, well said. Don't you have to live a long life to enjoy glory and wealth?" Sixth granduncle laughed, loosened his hand, and patted him on the shoulder. "What a good boy. Since you are here, you should stay for a few more days and let sixth granduncle entertain you well. Just tell me what you want. There is nothing that sixth granduncle can't enjoy. I don't mind staying for a few more days." Lin 19 shrugged. "But in fact, I am just a messenger. Sixth granduncle, if you want to entertain me, you have to let me finish my words." "What is it? Let 19 deliver it in person?" Sixth granduncle scratched his chin. "Let me hear it. Go ahead." Little Hut in the Woods said, "Teacher wants to see you." "Oh, I see." Sixth granduncle waved his hand casually and motioned his subordinate to come over. "You know 19, right? He is my good boy. It is rare for him to come here. Treat him well. Let his cousin take him to play for a few more days. Don't do anything bad." The subordinate nodded respectfully and gestured to Little Hut in the Woods. 19 child, this way, please." Little Hut in the Woods stood still. Sixth granduncle, "I have delivered the message. Shouldn't you give me a reply? You said you wanted to deliver the message. I listened to it. But when did I say I would reply to him?" Sixth granduncle was puzzled and asked back. He was amused. "He wants to see me? There are many people in the world who want to see me." 19 said, "He wants to see me. Does he want to ask a little girl to come out in a KTV? Sorry, I have never been to that kind of KTV, so I don't know which one is more difficult." Outside the door, there was a knock on the door. The young man who pushed the door in raised his head and smiled. "But I am already here. Mr. Lin, don't you even want to take a look at me?" In this way, he went deep into the heart of the 6 gang, without anyone else around. He casually took off the top hat on his head and placed it in the hands of the guard in front of the door. He held the collar of his suit and looked around as if he had never seen this place before. Everything was new to him. His sixth granduncle's smile did not change, but the darkness in his eyes was surging. He looked like a prey staring at food in front of him, and he could not help but mock him. "You actually dare to come? Old Mr. Lin is already so old. You can't possibly go to Donbua to see me, right? That's not good. We have to respect the elderly." Huaishur calmly replied, "Besides, I am a third-class military officer of the Astronomical Association. This is the modern realm, so why would I not dare to come?" "Ha ha 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 ha." The old man was amused. He looked around in disbelief and pointed at the defenseless man in front of him. "Do you see that? Is there anyone in the world who would use a pen to poke a hole in Renee's neck and still parade around with the title of a military officer? Isn't it normal to have an office dispute?" Huaishur explained, helplessly, "This is the bad thing about working in a public institution. There are always people who you can't help but want to kill, but you can't kill them. You can only pretend not to see each other when you see each other." His sixth granduncle held his chin and looked at the young man in front of him. "Do you think I care about the identity of a third-class military officer? I don't care. Since I'm here, there's nothing to lose by chatting with each other." Huaishur walked forward step by step until he was in front of his sixth granduncle. He raised his hand and ordered the subordinate next to the old man, "Don't you have any discerning eyes? Bring a chair over. Don't let people say that you don't even know the basic etiquette." In the silence, Everyone's expression was very ugly. Only his sixth granduncle's expression did not change. He glanced indifferently at Huaishur in front of him and waved his hand. Give him a chair. He is a guest, so he should have a place to sit. That's great. Huaishur sat in the chair in front of the old man. Without his order, someone quickly brought a table over and served tea and hot water. You've seen the noodles. You've also taken a seat. Now, the tea for the guest is also here. Mr. Huaishur, if you want etiquette, I'll give you etiquette now. I just hope you can accept it. Lin Wei raised his hand fearlessly, rolled up the hem of his sleeves, picked up the boiling water in the mud pot, and personally washed the teapot and teacups. He poured the tea and washed the tea meticulously. From beginning to end, he did not say a word. The evil thoughts in the fire boiled and emitted a piercing, murderous intent, dyeing the tea red like blood. In the end, he picked up the teacup in front of him. Tea, please. Huaishur also picked up the teacup and drank it in one gulp. The pain, like a sharp blade cutting his throat, entered his stomach along with the tea, quickly spreading and disappearing. The murderous intent entered his throat and quickly dissipated in the ultimate, leaving only the real and illusory pain. He poured the water and served the tea. The old man picked up the teacup again. Tea, please. The green tea was full of fierce poison. When it entered Huaishur's throat, not a single drop was left. Tea was served again. Tea, please. This time, some unknown disaster was brewing in the pitch-black tea, making one's hair stand on end. Lin Shizhou took a step back. Huaishur reached out, picked up the teacup, and drank it in one gulp. After 3 rounds of tea, the tea leaves in the pot had lost their color. Even if it was boiled fiercely, there was no trace of flavor left. The tea that was enough to drown and curse an entire block of people to death had been drunk. Good tea. Huaishur smacked his lips, savoring the thick sweetness in his throat, and sighed happily. I haven't drunk such good tea in a long time. If it was any other third order here, they would have died, suddenly. Even fourth order, ones would not dare to casually swallow such a fierce poison. Huaishur did not know that this sixth granduncle of the little house in the forest was also an abyss cooking demon, and he was quite accomplished. Unfortunately, he encountered the organization of the beasts of eternal life in the ultimate. No matter how fierce the poison curse was, it was useless. As expected of the king of Dambwa, your etiquette is thorough. Sixth granduncle looked deeply at Huaishur and said, Now, Mr. Huaishur, you can tell us why you are here. Did I not come here at Mr. Lin's invitation? Huaishur smiled. He picked up the teapot on the clay pot, poured boiling water, and said casually, I'm not afraid of being laughed at, but I'm a poor, narrow-minded, and stingy person. After earning a few bucks, I don't know my own worth. It's easy for me to become arrogant. I have the heart to become rich, but I don't have the life to become rich. He said, I don't really want to earn some money, but that doesn't stop others from taking over. Saying this, Huaishur tipped the teapot, poured out 2 cups of amber-colored tea from the tasteless tea leaves, and raised the teacups. Please have the tea, he said. Behind the tea table, the old man expressionlessly reached out and picked up the teacup in front of him. The evil destiny in his body surged like lava, bursting out a deep and subtle echo. He raised his head and drank it in one gulp. He put down the empty teacup in his hand, safe and sound. But then the stone bricks under his feet quickly decayed. Countless fine poisonous plants and flowers grew out of the cracks, then quickly withered and disappeared. Good tea. He tasted the remaining wisp of vitality from the mountain ghost in his mouth and shook his head. It's a pity that it's still lacking in flavor and stamina. How can it compare to the years of effort of the senior? Huaishur smiled. On the tea table, the the mighty and ferocious Pichot pet in the corner suddenly shook and silently cracked open a crack. This made the old man's expression gloomy. It was slightly better. I know that the alliance is so big that you covet it, but it doesn't matter. These are all things that I don't want to keep. It doesn't matter if the Six Directions Society wants to take it or even take it a step further. Huaisher turned the empty teacup in his hand and suddenly said, in the current capital, the Iron King Gang, the K Gang, the Company of Fools, all the established extreme Tao groups have been defeated. Only the Great Circle and the Six Directions Society still have strength. Isn't this a good opportunity? He said, now is the time to dominate the capital. Mr. Lin, sounds good, the old man said coldly, not even bothering to lift his eyelids. It sounds like sleep talking. Yes, it's like a dream. Huaisher shrugged. That's why the world is sometimes too fantastical. Even the underworld has a glass ceiling. No matter how strong the Six Directions Society is, they are unreliable foreigners to the Ingzhou system. They can only wander around the periphery and can't really enter the core. As long as the Ingzhou system existed, it was impossible to allow a group of foreigners to form an illegal group in the capital. This was a matter of course. Even the once insufferably arrogant K-Gang was just one of the channels used by the financial giants to launder money. The Iron King Gang was simply a dog of the government, a shit-stirrer supported by the looming Hall. But today is different from the past. Mr. Lin, Huaisher spread his hands. And I'm here on behalf of the Alliance, aren't I? The Alliance has decided to collectively transform, but there are definitely some people who can't walk under the sun. Instead of letting the scum and the name of the Alliance be buried together, it's better to keep their lives and create some value with the Alliance. It's also the last bit of mercy I, the General President, have for them. Lin Wei was not afraid of being amused. In other words, you're selling off the bad assets and still expect me to pay a high price for you. Huaisher? What's the saying? Both sides benefit. Huaisher replied calmly, isn't that what the Six Directions Society lacks? Time is precious. Mr. Lin, the opportunity to enter the local market is right in front of you. If you're decisive enough, before the looming hall cultivates a new black glove, we can at least take half of the market. If we give up some more, we can at least keep a third of the capital. A third of the capital, that is to say, 4 districts. At that time, the Alliance is just a name, and the Six Directions Society will get actual benefits that are not discounted. What we need to pay is just a small share of the profits according to the share. Lin Wei was not afraid. He widened his eyes in shock and couldn't help laughing. Laughing loudly, laughing so hard that tears almost came out. Just for a name, you want me to work for you, for free, and even take the blame? He asked mockingly. Huaisher, how can you say such shameless words? Chapter 802. Isn't business like this? You have needs, and so do I. There's no need to be secretive. Huaisher shrugged. You have to be thick-skinned. No matter how outrageous the sweet talk is, you have to be able to say it. Otherwise, how can you make money? Lin Wei looked at him indifferently without fear. But there are so many gangs in Kyoto. Why should I cooperate with you? Huaisher smiled. Of course, it's because the Ingzhou pedigree can't kill me. As long as the legitimacy of the Donghua inner circle still existed, as long as Huaisher was still wearing the tiger skin of the Astronomy Association, The Ingzhou pedigree could not think of using any illegal means to deal with Huaishur. This was a veritable country within a country, a sanctuary that any outsider dreamed of. If the Ingzhou division wanted to do it, it would be even simpler. Did they really think that Russell and the Ivory Tower were vegetarians? In today's Ingzhou, except for the anesthetic tracking alliance formed by the hybrids, there was no other gang in Kyoto that could resist the pressure of the looming hall. As for the other extreme Daos, they might even sell out the Six Directions Union, let alone cooperate with them. If the Ryoha Society wanted to cooperate, they had no other choice except for Huaishur. Lin Wei was still indifferent. He glanced at Huaishur and sneered. Then why should you cooperate with me? That's even simpler. Huaishur replied with a smile. Because I can kill you. At that moment, a buzzing sound burst out from outside the heavy walls. Hundreds of meters away, the noisy street instantly fell into silence. Everyone looked around in amazement, feeling the spreading chill and the urge to tremble. In the middle of the street, a middle-aged man with a dull expression and an unhealed scar on his face raised his head. He wore a samurai-like robe, and his right hand pressed on the non-existent sword at his waist. His murderous intent was ferocious. The protector of the alliance, Tian Tian. But then, several ferocious malice erupted from the headquarters of the Ryoha Society like a geyser, as if the door to the abyss had been opened. Under his provocation, the frenzied monsters revealed their existence without any concealment, gnashing their teeth and sucking blood. Surrounded by his subordinates, Lin Wei grinned fearlessly. The thirsty king of monsters asked mockingly, Him? No, he's not here to kill you, Huaishur said. He's in charge of protecting me, so that I can leave this place happy about the actions even if he has to sacrifice his own life. He also felt an uncontrollable little hut in the woods. Don't be angry. Who had been silent behind Huaishur, suddenly took a step forward, pulled out the cursed poison blade, helplessly, and pressed it against. Didn't you say it already? From the blade. rebellious. An evil aura Lin Wei was that not originated from the Lin never family, in his wildest and was dreams no different from Lin Wei's most useless little 19 was revealed. Then would have the ability to draw his blade in front of him. Lin Wei's fearless he even smile prepared froze. A thick black pot to put on his head. You've really grown up, little 19. Thank you for the compliment, granduncle. Lin Shurjo did not seem to notice the malice on granduncle. He adjusted his collar, intentionally or unintentionally revealing the badge of Dombua's supervisor under his collar. Imagine, the gold medal fighter of the Astronomy Association, the future hope of the Ivory Tower, the king of Dombua, at his weakest moment came to the headquarters of the Six He Society only to be stabbed in the back, and on the wound was the unique curse of the path of evil. If it wasn't Lin Wei who did it, could it be his student? Could it be that Lin Wei was not afraid to explain himself? Didn't the mouth grow on Huaishur's body? But it was his moment of carelessness that led the wolf into the house, only to find out that he had been played a badger game. You think this can make me bow down? Lin Wei was not afraid of anger, and laughed. Aren't you looking down on me too much, little brat? I'm just demonstrating a certain possibility that I said. Why are you in such a hurry? Huaishur shrugged indifferently and waved his hand. Lin Shurju sheathed his sword as if nothing had happened and smiled harmlessly at granduncle's scarlet eyes. Huaishur, you expect the Six He Society to help you through this difficult time, but you're bargaining with me with such an attitude. Aren't you being too arrogant? Lin Wei was not afraid and slowly withdrew his gaze. If there are enough benefits and benefits, I might consider it, but I don't like this attitude. It's fine as long as I like it. Huaishur was still calm. Isn't this the so-called cooperation? Both sides have to like it and be happy. If one side is not happy, then it can't be forced. He paused and could not help but laugh. As for the difficulties you mentioned, don't worry, I've never counted on the Six He Society. Even if I empty your pockets, how much money can you have? He did not care for that little bit of money. The old man sneered. Then we'll talk about it after you get through this. Okay, then we'll talk about it when the time comes. Huaisher slowly got up and reminded him, but helping in a time of need and adding flowers to a brocade are two different things. Old sir, when the time comes, the price will not be this. Lin Wei was not afraid of such an attitude and could not help but sneer, thinking that it was the last stubbornness. We'll talk about it when the time comes. Then goodbye. Huaisher turned around and led his students away from the Six He Society's encirclement. He smiled and waved goodbye to everyone who had served him. A gloomy subordinate asked softly, "Old dragon, are we just going to let them go like this? What else can we do?" Lin Wei was not afraid and looked at his confidant with a faint smile. "You go and kill him, and I'll announce you as the next leader tomorrow. What do you think?" His confidant lowered his head in silence and did not speak again. On the tea table, there was the sound of something breaking. Countless wriggling blood vessels emerged from the thin celadone teacup, causing the texture and color of flesh and blood to emerge from the verdant teacup. In the end, a deformed eye slowly opened and stared viciously at the world in front of it, then quickly declined along with the fading vitality. Only fragments and dust were left. Lin Wei was not afraid. He took one last look and left with a flick of his sleeves. What a waste of a good pot. Late at night, at the Dambo Pier, a luxurious liner slowly docked on the shore. The former industries of the Heavenly Mu family were still handed over to the Heavenly Mu family to continue to operate, including the important financial resources of the former alliance, the business of shipping, smuggling, and deep-sea fishing. For an island country like Yingzhou, it was natural for them to rely on the sea for their livelihood. At this moment, as the liner docked, a petite figure appeared behind the gradually lowered escalator. When she saw Huaisher standing below, she was stunned for a moment, then hurried down and nodded respectfully. "Teacher, I'm back. You've grown taller. Xiao Yuan." Huaisher rubbed her hair. "Thank you for your hard work." "Don't mention it. I'm just running errands." After she finished speaking, she suddenly thought of something and moved aside, revealing the guest behind her, who was walking down the escalator. As if she had been exposed to the sun, the middle-aged woman's skin was slightly tanned, her footsteps were light, and her body was well-proportioned like a cheetah's. Her eyes were almost glowing in the dark. She took the initiative to extend her hand. "Mr. Huaisher, my father is tied up with miscellaneous matters and can't travel, so I'm here on behalf of my father." "Welcome, Miss Gwendolyn." Huaisher nodded and held her hand. "I also want to thank the PASS group for lending a helping hand at such a critical time. This is just the next step of our cooperation." Gwendolyn smiled. "When I came, my father told me that you are his friend." As she spoke, the dark tide was lit up by the searchlights in the distance. Amidst the rumbling of the steam whistle, countless huge silhouettes leaped out from the horizon at the end of the sea. The mighty fleet of ships broke through the tide and headed towards Yingzhou. This was just the beginning. What a rundown place. In front of a dark car, a middle-aged man in a suit raised his hand and fanned the air in front of him. It's hard to imagine that there is such a desolate place in the capital now. Is there really any investment value in a place like this? He turned around and looked at the people behind him, triggering a burst of laughter. On the other side of the road, the bulldozers on the construction site were puffing out thick smoke, clearing the debris on the ground with loud noises. In the ruins behind the broken wall, the children playing in the secret base looked up curiously and peered at the solemn fleet of cars before quickly looking away. Only the visitors coldly observed the scene around them, and the receptionist in front of them. He was simply too young. They were too dismissive of them. Was he going to give it up? "I'm the receptionist appointed by Mr. Huaisher this time, Forest Hut." The young man with a gentle and sunny smile bowed and handed over his business card. making people have a good impression. Thank you for today's evaluation. I'm Karaoke Shin, the Vice President of the Risk Management Department of Chungtong Bank. Please advise me. The middle-aged man leading the team did not underestimate the young man in front of him. He also handed over his business card with both hands solemnly and revealed a business smile. Please rest assured that we will definitely give an objective and fair result. Forrest Hutt nodded. Then, all the information is ready. Please follow me. However, Karaoke did not take a step forward, and none of the evaluators behind him followed him. He just stood there. He looked around coldly. When Forrest Hutt turned around curiously, he saw Karaoke's smile. The polite smile could not hide the hidden coldness below. There's no need to look at the information. We've seen enough these days. He said, this time, the main purpose of coming here is to break away from the data on paper and personally go to the field to investigate. I don't think Mr. Lin Zhong will mind, right? He did not hide his purpose for coming, nor did he intend to follow the previous rules. At this point, if Dombua's people still expected others to follow their pace, wouldn't they be too naive? The surprise that he had expected came. The young man was stunned for a moment, and then his expression became serious, as if he had finally realized that something was wrong. Lin, he corrected, this was the most important thing. Chapter 803. There was a sudden silence. Karaoke was stunned. He didn't know what he was talking about. My surname is Lin, and my name is Zhonghua. Thank you. Forrest Hutt pointed at the business card he handed over and began to admire the Yingzhou people's ability to pretend. And it's not a pronunciation, it's a pronunciation. I'm not from Yingzhou. Sorry, I didn't notice. It's okay. Lin Shizhou waved his hand casually. To put it simply, you don't want to sit in the office, but want to walk around, right? Do you need me to arrange a car? No need. I came from a business background. Karaoke patted his thigh and looked proud. Just relying on this pair of legs is enough. He wasn't interested in sitting in a car to see the model projects that had been built. Instead, he was more interested in seeing the darkness hidden under the sun in the inner circle of Dombua, those decadent and abandoned places. Otherwise, how could he deduct a few valuations? It seems that everyone came prepared. Forrest Hutt raised his eyebrows, but he didn't panic. Instead, he smiled. Then, is there anything you want to see? How about we take a look at Vermilion Bird Village first? It's right next to it. Karaoke picked up the map in his hand and suggested, I saw that your construction plan didn't mention the project there. Recently, large-scale construction has begun again. Fortunately, it's just a large competition venue and a few training bases. Lin Shizhou walked in front and led the way. After 2 turns, they appeared in front of the construction site. The sign of the construction of white paper was still hanging at the top. In the midst of the clamor, the foundation had not been dug yet, and several construction vehicles were constantly entering and leaving with black smoke. In order to enrich the spiritual activities of the people of Dombua, improve everyone's cultural literacy, and cultivate their hobbies, the person in charge, Mr. Weischer, has decided to start construction in advance. The foundation will be ready in a few days. It is expected that this place will be filled with a concert hall, a dedicated competition venue, and facilities that can accommodate hundreds of students at the same time for training and accommodation. Lin Sergio stood in front of the construction renderings and showed the future to the evaluation team, introducing it endlessly. However, the expressions of the visitors were still cold and indifferent. They couldn't help but want to laugh. This kind of trick was too common. In order to get out of the predicament and improve the confidence of investors, they did not hesitate to drink poison to quench their thirst, draw bigger pies, and dream bigger. However, this would only make them even more short of money. It would not help the current situation at all. After cheating the investors, who would care about the follow-up construction? It could even be said that it was destined to end badly from the start. Kataoka looked around. At the same time, he felt disdain in his heart, but at the same time, he nodded in admiration. In that case, it would probably cost a lot of money, right? Lin Sergio nodded. It's all right. It'll only cost about 10 million USD or so. It's just that the maintenance fees are a little troublesome. Who are you trying to fool? Kataoka sneered in his heart. It was already good enough that 20 million US dollars was enough to get a professional concert hall. Did he really think that professional sound facilities were the same as those on the streets? The rest of the project could not be completed. 10 million? Let's talk about it after the initial phase of the project is completed. If that's the case, why wasn't the project written in the loan proposal? Kataoka asked. This part doesn't need a loan. The project funds have all been paid. Lin Sergio looked at them in confusion. This was donated by the sponsors, including the project funds, professional equipment, and personnel. We only provided the venue and follow-up maintenance, so 10 million is actually more than enough. We can even save a lot. The evaluation team was silent for a long time. They looked at each other in shock. For the first time, they felt that they did not understand Ingzhou language. What did he mean? There was a fool who came to Ingzhou and did not do so many investment projects. Instead, he came to Doomsday to build an art center for free? What kind of dream was this? Well, isn't it written clearly here? Lin Sergio reached out and pointed at the announcement unit below the renderings. Hell Music Association, Cooking Demon Competition Organizing Committee, and Muse Club announce. Oh, in the instant of dead silence, Kataoka's eyes could not help but twitch. Then, he felt the phone in his trouser pocket vibrate, and the phone beep behind him kept ringing. The notification of tomorrow's news popped up. Big news in Ingzhou. As a member of the investment industry and the risk control department, his need for information and financial news was far greater than that of other industries. Almost everyone's phone would not be turned off 24 hours a day, and there were even 3 or 4 phones that were ready to receive news at any time. When he took out his phone, he saw the title on the pop-up window. Who will be the host of the next Asian Cooking Demon Competition? Enter Doomsday, the future city of art. Is this an official announcement? Forrest Hutt came over, and his smiling face was indescribably annoying. I wanted to ask everyone to keep it a secret, but it should be fine now. Mr. Kataoka, you seem to be feeling unwell. Are you feeling unwell? Kataoka's expression twitched. No, I'm not. Then what do you think of this news? The young man blinked his big curious eyes and looked at him. It seems like the situation is very serious. No, it's a good thing. Kataoka replied stiffly, It's all good news. That's good. It's really reassuring when a professional speaks. Lin Sergio breathed a sigh of relief and continued to lead the way. Since we're already at Suzakacho, why don't we take a look at Taifucho and Doomsday subdistrict? In the future plan, this area will be a commercial area, and there are already many projects under construction. The people of the evaluation team followed behind without saying a word. Kataoka glanced back and saw that someone had already called the higher-ups for instructions. Although it was an unexpected major benefit, it still had nothing to do with the financial situation of Dombor itself. Tourism may be able to drive a lot of industries, but compared to the large area, it was a drop in the bucket and insignificant. It was just on the surface. Just look at the construction sites that were still being built rapidly on both sides. If they couldn't find a large amount of income, then the financial situation would only get tighter and tighter. He stopped in his tracks and looked up at the huge building that had been preliminarily outlined by the sea breeze in the distance. Is this the planned aquarium? Yes. Lynn Sergio nodded and looked at the outline of the building that was gradually being completed. How is it? It's very impressive, isn't it? To be honest, I've never been to an aquarium in my life. After the opening, please take care of me. With all due respect, Lynn, Mr. Lynn. Kataoka pushed his glasses and said seriously, for today's Donbwa, facilities such as the aquarium itself are not necessary, and it also requires long-term financial subsidies and expenditures for maintenance. I'm afraid it will be difficult for our bank to pass such funds. And the building next to it is not in the loan plan, right? Additional construction? That building, that is the new headquarters of Donbwa Shipping. They are fully responsible for the construction of the building. Donbwa Shipping? Yes, it should be the news in the past 2 days. Miss Rika of the Simu family conformed to the changes. The members voted and passed the decision to reorganize the Simu Ocean Fishing Group and officially change its name. The headquarters will also be relocated nearby. The aquarium next to it is sponsored and maintained by them. By the way, there is additional funding and support from the Pacific Rim Rare Animal Protection Association. They will also sponsor a considerable number of precious marine species. Lynn Sergio calmly replied, as for the loan, you don't have to worry about it. You should actually look at the current information. The aquarium has abundant funds and is no longer in the loan plan. Kataoka froze in place. Lynn Sergio paused for a moment and looked at him deeply. With a faint smile, he told him Donbwa Shipping and the Pacific Rim Wildlife Protection Association have signed a new liner route agreement. The two sides will further cooperate around the common vision of protecting more endangered marine species. This is also written in the information. It's a pity that you didn't read it. Kataoka frowned subconsciously. He noticed that something was wrong. The reorganization of the Simu Ocean Fishing Group was a small matter. What he cared about was another organization mentioned by the cabin in the woods. Wait a minute. He remembered that the Pacific Rim Rare Animal Protection Association was an environmental protection organization with a long name. It was composed of two organizations with the same long name, the Southeast Asian Marine Conservation Association and the Global Whale Protection Association. The operating group behind it should be. His brain buzzed, and he didn't react. However, they did not have much time to react before continuous notifications rang out from the evaluator team's phones again. There was new good news. Donbwa Shipping has officially joined the Glorious Shipping Alliance. Glorious Shipping Alliance. A shipping alliance led by the Egyptian royal family's Northern Shipping, the Russian Federation's Emperor Shipping, and Dongxia's Distant Shipping. After monopolizing the Indian Ocean, it is a behemoth that occupies more than 60% of the logistics channels in the Western Pacific Ocean. The formed Logistics Alliance shares all port berths, containers, and even logistics information internally. It is an out-and-out monopoly-level giant. With Zindiandi Shipping and the Convergence Alliance, it occupies more than 90% of the shipping channels in the world and monopolizes all border sea transportation. Even if a sampan entered their register, they would be able to fish for endless amounts of gold on the sea without any hindrance. But the problem was with Donbwa Shipping's tiny size. How could they possibly join in? Mr. Kataoka, the subordinate came forward and said in a low voice, "Internal news just arrived. Taiching Heavy Industry has accepted an order for 16 supergiant freighters from Donbwa Shipping. Impossible!" Kataoka lost his voice. Where did they get the money? How can they get so much business? This is too hurtful, Mr. Kataoka. Next to him, Lin Shurjo was stunned and shrugged helplessly. We borrowed a special interest-free loan from the Dongxia Border Bank, and the speed of approval was quite fast. After all, there are also shares of Taiching heavy industry in it, and even the assessment was saved. It's all because of the teacher's own face. He smiled and explained. After all, he has more friends. In the silence, only the sound of the mobile phone, vibrating again, sounded. This time, it was the Asian headline of the financial section of tomorrow's news. At the press conference of Australia's grassy mining group, the mayor of Canberra, Australian mining giant, Sand King Reed Turner personally announced Frowny Face Grassy Mining Group and Dombu Group have reached strategic cooperation. Within the next 7 years, Dombu Shipping would undertake all transport orders of grassy mining in the Yingzhou region. As a resource-poor island country, Yingzhou's mining industry was basically dependent on Australia's imports. Starting next year, all the transport of iron ore, aluminum, and bituminous coal to Yingzhou would be completely monopolized by Dombu Shipping. Not only that, Dombu Group had already obtained the authorization of the Ivory Tower and obtained the right to use an agency of all its smelting patents. They would also join forces with Regis Kansan Iron and Steel to build a brand new giant smelting base in Anfang. Together with grassy mining, they would explore the field of pollution-free smelting technology. The amount of information in a short piece of news was frighteningly huge. Ivory Tower, Australian mining, and Glory Shipping had silently completed the convergence in just a few days. In the hands of one person, with him as the leader, a brand new industrial chain was formed that carried out all the steps of mining, transportation, production, and processing. Not only that, the monster that had yet to break out of its shell had already reached out to the market of Yingzhou's heavy industry. Everyone seemed to have seen a brand new behemoth rising from this narrow area. The situation was completely reversed at this moment. But when the weight fell from the sky and pressed on the other end of the scale, what was emitted was the crisp sound of the mobile phone vibrating. It made people's vision go dark, and they almost couldn't stand still. It seems that I don't have to tell you about the purchase orders from the Abyss Development Agency and the archaeological team. Lin 19 smiled and looked at the dull faces. He felt a burst of pure and strong resentment gathering and couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Phew, comfortable. Chapter 804. At the signing ceremony, the lights shone brightly. Huai Shi took the pen from Yuan Yuan and signed his name on the contract with the Dombu Group's official seal under the frenzied cameras of the reporters. The three-party exchange contract was made in 5 copies, which were kept by the Dombu Group, the Australian Grassland Mining Company, the Kansan Group, as well as the Ivory Tower and the Legacy Court. It was a preliminary agreement of strategic cooperation between the parties. He finally breathed a sigh of relief. The dust had settled. He extended his hand to the smiling woman beside him. "Miss Gwendolyn, thank you for your support. Sand King. I hope our friendship can last forever. We're just helping each other for what we need. The Grassland Mining Company is honored to have an ally like you." Gwendolyn squeezed his hand tightly, and the two of them showed their intimate cooperation under the spotlight of the reporters. However, after letting go and returning backstage, Gwendolyn seemed to be a little hesitant, as if she wanted to say something but stopped herself. "What's wrong?" Weischer asked curiously. "Do you have any questions about the terms of the contract, or did we not treat you well enough?" "No, it's just a personal request." Gwendolyn thought for a moment and looked at the man, who was much younger than her. She asked embarrassedly, "Excuse me, can you say that sentence to me again?" Weischer was confused. "What sentence?" He felt Yuan's subtle gaze behind him and could not help but feel a little nervous. Gwendolyn's expression suddenly became a little excited, and she reminded him in a low voice, "The sentence you said to the inner circle of the Doomsday group, the sentence." As she spoke, she made a pose in an attempt to awaken Weischer's memory. Weischer was stunned for a long time and scratched his head in confusion. "You mean," he asked tentatively, "we both have a bright future?" Yes, that's it. That's it." Gwendolyn excitedly clenched her fist and shook his hand vigorously, her eyes sparkling. "That's why I'm here this time. Thank you, thank you. By the way, can you sign for me again later? I bought your full set of limited edition cards." Yes. Weischer's eyes twitched. "No problem. The needs of the partners should be satisfied as much as possible, and the conditions that could not be met should also be met." Soon, Gwendolyn was dragged away by her assistant. There were still many things that she needed to arrange. Before she left, she still insisted on reminding Weischer not to forget her signature. After watching her leave, Weischer felt cold sweat dripping from his forehead. The pressure was immense. Does this count as a failure of my transformation? How could he still rely on his fans for a living? Of course, the success of this cooperation might not have been due to the addition of the idol halo. Lady Gwendolyn had been married for many years and even had 2 children. She was a rare career woman who cared about her family. As the executive officer of the Grassy Mining Company, no matter how busy she had to call her husband and children to tell them good-night stories every night. She might lose her composure because of her good-looking face. In the end, the cooperation between the Grassy Group and Doomsday Group was built on the basis of mutual benefits. The Grassy Group, which was about to reach saturation, needed the Ivory Tower's channels to expand its sales and influence in the Border and Inferno. Sand King was more interested in the other thing that Weischer had promised him. The key that no one took seriously in the news was the field of pollution-free smelting technology. It was true that Australia was a desert, but the area around Canberra had been restored to green and vitality. The heavy industry of the past could not casually pollute and destroy the environment. Therefore, most of the production bases were migrating to the desert areas in the interior of Australia. But if this continued, it would only treat the symptoms and not the root cause. It would also cause problems for the expansion of the Greenland. This old man, who was gradually becoming known as the Lord of Fertile Earth, would never allow his long-cherished wish to be destroyed because of this. What they needed at this time was technical support from the Ivory Tower. Weischer also had the unique craftsmanship in the entire territory. Behind the terrifying technology that could completely mechanize the entire Inferno was countless unique craftsmanship that was different from today's technology. According to the calculations of the scholars at the Ivory Tower Research Institute, after the ivory tower's technical ability combined with the craftsmanship of the craftsmanship, within about 3 years the pollution caused by conventional heavy industry and metal smelting could be reduced by 30%. If there was a breakthrough in the technology, the final reduction would stabilize at about 43%. If the cost-performance ratio was not considered, there would be no problem in achieving a completely pollution-free state. On the day of the signing ceremony, the new Smelting Technology Center would be built in Doomsday. The construction team of the Ivory Tower would be responsible for it and would be able to start work within a week. But this had nothing to do with Huaishur. It could be said that other than occasionally needing his signature, everything else had nothing to do with him. There would be more professional people in charge, so Huaishur did not need to worry about it. He sat in the car, closed his eyes, and could not help but let out a long breath. He felt a deep sense of exhaustion. In just 2 or 3 days, he felt that he had used up half of his brain in order to settle this matter. If the situation had not forced him, he would not have brought forward the mid to late stage of his original plan to this point. Behind the seemingly awe-inspiring results were Huaishur's careful operation as if she was treading on thin ice. To put it bluntly, there was nothing strange about it. He was just relying on his face to freeload all the way, gaining something without risking anything. First, he relied on his friendship to open up a path to Sand King. With the guarantee of the Ivory Tower's background, the two sides were able to negotiate on equal terms. After ensuring that Doomsday Transport could handle the logistics of their transportation, he turned around and looked for Hu Po's stinky sister. He joined forces with the Guanshan group, which was now so rich that it needed to be digested, and took the large order for the concentrate smelting. This was the first step. Next, he went to Taiching Heavy Industries, cut the queue, and placed an order for 18 giant cargo ships. Then, relying on the transportation order and Yi Shuia's relationship, he got an interest-free loan from the Dongsha Border Bank for free. He even pulled in his cousin Chu Hongqian as a shareholder to share the risk. Then, through the Dongsha genealogy, as well as his identity in the Southeast Asian Ocean Protection Association, he contacted the Northern Shipping Company. He relied on the 18 giant cargo ships and the order in his hands to obtain the qualifications to join. In the end, with the patent of the Ivory Tower in hand, he returned the favor and turned around to have a second discussion with the Grassy Mining Company. He completed a deep strategic cooperation and completely opened up the entire chain. He completed the realization of his connections and foundation. Everyone had money to earn, and every participant had meat to eat. He was even about to form a new industry monopoly. He only lacked money, but would the problem now still be money? The current Doomsday inner circle was not short of money at all. As long as Huaishur nodded, money would be sent to him endlessly. From the originally bright future to the rise of an industry giant, this was no longer a matter of steady profit and no loss. Instead, it was a loss if one joined the partnership late. 1 second late, 1 second late, 1 day late, 1 day late. If they could not get on board, the investors with a lot of money in their hands would probably not be able to swallow this regret for the rest of their lives. Even if he did not go to Mount Guan and the Grassy Mining Company to borrow money, Huaishur was not weak at all. As long as he took this report card to Russell, kicked open the office door, slammed the contract on the table, and told him, "Old bastard, hurry up and give me the money. Do you think the old man will give me less money?" Russell was laughing so hard that his legs were not closed yet. He was going crazy with joy. Just Weischer's performance that exceeded everyone's expectations had been unanimously recognized and approved by all the members of the Academic Affairs Office. He did not rely on murder and arson, but relied on his own ability to prove Russell's vision and prove his value. If it were anyone else, could they do 1/10 of what he did now? He revived the Dambois inner circle out of thin air and introduced strong reinforcements such as Taiching Heavy Industry, Australia's grassy mining company, and Glory Shipping. Not only did he not lose any initiative, but he also consolidated his indispensable position in the alliance. He had also fulfilled the wish of many people in the ivory tower over the past 50 years. The first step of returning to the present realm was a solid one. It was like using an iron head to smash the nail of the ivory tower into the floor of the present realm with his bare hands. He couldn't pull it out. The future grand plan was settled in the frame of the Dambois inner circle. Now, the foundation had been laid. As long as the money was in place, the Dambois inner circle would immediately become a treasure bowl famous for cutting-edge technology development and tourism. Therefore, it was time to withdraw the money. Weischer looked up and heard the sound of the car door being opened. The midgets of the Magic Gold Bank stood respectfully outside the car, smiling with surprise and enthusiasm. They rushed up like a swarm of bees, grabbed his small hand, and did not let go. They surrounded him and bombarded him with stereo sound. "Mr. Weischer, please come in. Everyone is here. You're the only one left to sign. There's no hurry. Weischer stood firmly in front of the red carpet, reached out, adjusted his collar, and replied with a smile, "It's just as you said." He paused for a moment and said seriously, "We also feel that it's necessary to reiterate the development prospects of the Dambois district." In a short silence, all the faces stiffened. Then they showed 10 times more enthusiasm and agreement than before. The applause was like thunder. By the time the person in charge of Chungtong Bank arrived, the meeting was already over. The dust had settled. "What the hell is going on?" The middle-aged man who barged into the meeting room was furious. "Excluding us from the meeting, you conducted a discussion. This kind of thing is simply unheard of. We're going to report your illegal operation to the present Union Alliance. We, Chungtong Bank, will never allow or approve of this kind of thing." He was simply unable to restrain his anger. Whether it was a pretense or purely out of anger, it had to be like this. Otherwise, how could they seize this loophole and gain more initiative in the future? But unexpectedly, in the joyous atmosphere, those smiles were still there, as if they had no intention of appeasing or backing down. They just held their teacups and smiled. "Mr. Yamanaka, you came at the right time. This meeting passed 2 issues, just in time to inform you." Weischer spun a pen in his hand and looked at him with a smile that was not a smile. Between his 5 fingers, the pen spun nimbly, as if it would stab into his throat at any time, making the corners of his eyes twitch wildly. He stiffened in place and felt a wave of uneasiness. The first thing, due to the increase in the project, the loan required by the Dambois district this time seems to be about twice as much as the original. This, Yamanaka's expression twitched, and he decided to take the initiative to take a step back. After evaluation, it's indeed a matter of course. It's not impossible to discuss. There's no need to discuss. Weischer said calmly, "This is the second thing." He spread his hands regretfully and announced, "Due to the increase in the loan volume and the change in demand, the composition of the syndicate can no longer meet the needs of the Dambois inner circle. Therefore, in order to understand the difficulties of your bank and avoid a break in the capital chain, I suggest that the syndicate structure be restructured and optimized. Dambois district will no longer apply for loans from Chungtong, so you don't have to worry about any risks in the future. As for the vacant position, how about the Dongxia Border Bank fill-in?" As he spoke, he looked around and spread his hands. "I've finished speaking. Next, we can start voting. The dwarf of the magic gold bank smiled and raised his hand. Seconded. The person in charge of the Archean fund shrugged and also raised his hand. Seconded. Next was the American Free Bank and the Russian Federation's Snow Mountain Commercial Bank. In the end, when Huaishur raised her hand, the final decision was made. Yamanaka's vision turned black, and he fell to the ground. He could no longer hear what was said after that. His heart was cold. Please listen to our explanation, Mr. Huaishur. When the meeting ended, the special agent of the Changtong Bank, who had rushed over after receiving the news, finally found Huaishur in the parking lot. He looked embarrassed, uneasy, and full of guilt. This is all because of the reckless actions of the people below. It's this bastard who listened to other people's instigation and wanted to make things difficult for you. Without waiting for Huaishur to speak, the man who had been pushed out to take the blame leaned over in a sorry state. It was a standard seat. The slightly old servant promised, in a sorrowful voice, almost in tears, "We have always treated you as a precious friend. Please don't be so heartless. Give us another chance. We will definitely give you an explanation." Huaishur was at a loss. He could hardly tell whether the two faces were sincere or acting. It was also difficult to understand the brain circuits of the Yingzhou people. "There's no need to be like this, both of you." He sighed and comforted them softly. "I know that you have your difficulties. How can I not understand? I have always been full of trust and understanding for your bank. It's impossible for me to hold a grudge because of a small matter." The special agent was stunned and immediately pleasantly surprised. But then he saw Huaishur's regretful expression. "Unfortunately, I have never had many friends, and you are not included in them." He raised his head with a faint smile and glanced at the gloomy old man behind the window of the car in the distance. He could not help but shrug helplessly. "And who are you?" In the silence, no one responded. Huaishur waved his hand, said goodbye to his neighbor with a smile, and turned to walk away. Stepping on his road, he returned to the place that only belonged to him. This was the first step. Chapter 805. A week later, in the Doomsday district, outside the observation room of the newly built technical laboratory at the edge of the mountains, scholars and alchemists from all over the world sat in front of the screen, staring at the scene in the observation room with wide eyes. Professor Anton, who was specially sent as a technical guide, picked up the walkie-talkie in his hand. "You can start now, Mr. Huaisher." In the empty space of the observation room, Huaisher raised his hand and temporarily took off the surveillance of the Continuation Institute. The flesh on his right arm quickly showed the texture of steel, and the complicated mechanism unfolded, revealing the lingering on the other hand flames. The craftsman's skills were closer to the thinking right in his scholars. Crimson Streaks paid more attention to strengthening the essence of the forged under his surveillance. Instead of turning the observation room more outstanding material, rapidly, it was better to make the iron as more if there was an invisible and fire burning fiercely, which was the most ideal state in fingers covered it. It was not smelting at high temperatures, but extraction and burning red color instantly faded. Was and the intact supplementary effect was to make the changes more visible and faster. Retracted his hand. The true key and was buckled that the monitoring had temporarily given the item a strand of origin substance. To be precise, the forging furnace. The extraction part of the demonstration was been given a one-sided when he picked up the hammer next to him and knocked on the ore full of cracks. The iron contained stone powder naturally gathered down towards the inner particles with impurities forming the final all over the ground. Unlike on the original table, it did not change the essence become an iron bar, but unlike scholars as a finger, it did not rely on beautiful snowflake texture. It had some of the advantages. Thank you for your hard work, and Mr. at the same time, the experiment staff for the shortcomings to greet him. And in terms of application, and there may be advantages and disadvantages according to the actual situation. After waving his hand to indicate was still that a technology that did not have the cost-performance ratio for and the went current outside situation. The monitoring room. The technology to join that the once recreated the this Twilight was the demonstration developed and teaching of the forger's but it was skills. Not necessary under for dozens of observation and recording devices. Having the characteristics of all scholars secrets were and alchemists. And displayed that they had to meet everyone for discussion and summary for both aptitudes. It is indeed why smelting take a detour that is completely with the hand of confinement, thinking of but the others could forget about it. The existence of the forging furnace alone had cut off the and path pondered for a moment. Alchemists to carry it does feel forward. A little like alchemy. The forging furnace could it only be built sublimation by the previous generation of alchemists reconstruction from the old foundation. The only living alchemist the origin of the name forger was Huaisher. Beside him, he was still paralyzed. Alchemist nodded. Now, there's a he was gasping for breath attraction. When refining this iron. Was just a demonstration of the basic not skills. Everyone was and it was adaptable nothing special. As him. And the same effect could be achieved the more technology with alchemy, there was, but there was better, a subtle difference the between best the technology. Two. Those who came here were most all suitable for oneself and elites. What Huaisher needed to do they could feel was not to spread her influence. Alchemy focused on the transformation and sublimation of miracles. Instead, she needed to provide as ordinary data and practical cases and turning something possible into something innate talents and advantages of blacksmithing. This would allow the research center to analyze and shorten the preliminary research process. As for how to deconstruct, imitate, and absorb the advantages of the alchemist's technology and how much could be done, it was the job of these experts. Are you feeling well? During the lunch break, Professor Anton sat opposite Huaisher with a plate in his hand. He glanced at the still red bracelet in his hand and said, "There's no need to force yourself. This is not something that can be achieved overnight. You should rest in peace now. Staying at home will make me look hairy." Huaisher shook his head. "I have to come out and show my presence." "As long as you have a sense of propriety." Professor Anton did not try to persuade him. It was not that he was indifferent or anything, but he trusted Huaisher's judgment more. So he changed the topic and talked about the school. But at the end of the meal, he could not help but ask about Huaisher's condition. "Actually, it's almost healed, but the tenants can't be chased away, and they don't pay the rent. It's always a waste of energy." Huaisher raised his right hand and moved his 5 fingers, revealing a trace of metallic luster. It was a state he deliberately maintained. thanks to the triumphant progress a while ago, the inner circle of Dan Wave was changing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Everyone could feel the light of the future approaching bit by bit. Great Si Ming's divinity was also recovering rapidly, like adding oil to the fire. The original 2+ years was shortened by more than a month out of thin air. This was not the final result, but it was still in the stage of slowly accelerating. It could be predicted that in the future, the speed of shortening would be faster and faster. Now, he could be said to have escaped the most dangerous stage, and the situation would only become clearer. Now, his body had completely recovered, and his soul was free from the erosion of the abyssal sediment. He did not have to worry about the risk of solidifying at any time, but his injuries were difficult to heal. His soul had merged with the forging furnace, and the sacred mark had merged with the two at the same time. There was no distinction between the three. Now, he was a genuine furnace of negative energy, but the problem was that there was always a piece of annoying firewood in the furnace that could not be burned out. Not only that, it kept trying to erode him, assimilate him, and turn the furnace back into flesh. The funny thing was, Huaishur had been trying to restore the steel arm to its original state, but now it was the other way around. He had to work hard to prevent the forging furnace from being turned into flesh. After all, it was a destructive element, and even the cell tissue of a derivative had such a powerful threat. Thinking of this, he was suddenly a little worried about the bald man who had disappeared. He was not worried about whether his hair would fall off, but whether his condition would be a problem. This was what Huaishur had been hiding from everyone. Yu Dongri should know that even if he changed his body and split his soul, he did not get rid of the erosion of the abyssal. He just sealed the mutated part of his soul. The transformation process was interrupted. The progress bar was stuck. He was still stepping on the wire rope of the abyssal abyss, but it was useless to worry. With Lu Ri's family background, he could naturally keep him safe. Huaishur did not need to worry about him. After cooperating with the research center to complete the basic data collection, Huaishur had nothing to do after setting the time for the next demonstration. There were still a few hours before dinner, but there was nothing else to do. He found that he had nothing to do. He might as well take a leisurely stroll. Go shopping. With a bodyguard, wearing a flowery shirt and big pants, Raymond wore a big pair of sunglasses and a swordsman's straw hat. He held a crepe in one hand and an ice cream in the other. His backpack was stuffed with a bunch of specialties and car models, and under his arm was a complete set of spray equipment. Oh, the capital is really not bad. He finished it in a few bites and scratched the leg hair on his legs like a gorilla that had not fully evolved. Boss, pancake fruit, give me another set of crepe. Huaishur was dumbfounded. What are you doing here? Traveling, Raymond answered in a booming voice. Huaishur was speechless. After this guy had fun, he did not even drive his car. Every day, he would wander from morning to night. The only reason he would come back at night was because Feng Shu was paying for his meals. Unless Huaishur went out, he would never be found. He was having so much fun in the present realm that he even forgot about the oath of the tomb of the unreturnable. Anyway, he was now on a mission. Forget about home. Absolutely not. It was just a mission from the ivory tower. In addition to being a driver, this guy's most important task was to be a bodyguard. During Huaishur's period of weakness, he protected Huaishur from accidental assassinations and attacks. In the end, Huaishur's period of weakness was almost over, and everything was calm and peaceful. Nothing happened at all. He was even happier to touch him. Seeing his unguarded look, Huaishur could not help but sigh. Are you protecting me, or am I protecting you? It's all the same. It's all the same. Raymond grinned and was about to say something, but the smile froze on his face. His fingers subconsciously contracted, and he crushed the crepe into mud. The sauce splashed. Huaisha frowned, not knowing what he was doing, but Raymond's expression became serious. "It's time to go home, boss," he said. "Otherwise, we won't be able to make it in time for the 6 o'clock cartoon." At the end of the long street, the harsh sound of tires rubbing against the road rang out. The giant truck openly broke into the downtown area and started on its own. Then, the spray-painted logo of Huaisha trembled, and the heavy cannon behind the cargo compartment began to warm up. And just inside the core, the radar alarm was shrill. The highly dangerous target was rapidly approaching. Through the radar signal, Raymond only felt a bone-piercing chill completely engulfing him. This kind of alarm was too outrageous, and the danger estimate had already broken the meter at the moment of detection. It was just like saying something. Who did Huaisha, this bastard, offend? Grade 5. But how could a grade 5 openly kill him in the downtown area of the present realm? Just feeling the rapid approach of the signal, the gastrocnemius muscles on his calf began to twitch and tremble, and it was almost difficult for him to breathe. He wanted to turn around, but the terrifying chill froze his movements in place. An invisible aura fell from the sky and suppressed Gordium's body from a distance. The nothingness of the killing intent actually brought substantial pain. Then, a thick palm pressed on Raymond's shoulder. Brat, a face covered with muscles poked out from his side, turned around, looked at him, and wondered, "I just went out for a trip. Why do you want to hit me with a cannon?" In the brief silence, Huaisha froze in place, looking at the smug old face, and finally couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Don't bully the younger generation for no reason. Okay, teacher Luo? Of course, it's because it's fun. The head instructor of the Orchard Gym's 400,000 bodybuilding muscles, Huaisha's cheap teacher, and the father of his senior sister, Coach Luo, grinned, revealing a sinister smile that wasn't kind at all. Long time no see. Chapter 806. 3 hours later, the dinner was over. It's so healthy. It's rare to have such a good meal. After finishing the steak and salad, Elder Luo put down his knife and fork and habitually took out his protein powder thermos. He saw a cup of freshly squeezed juice beside his hand. It was as if his weight and energy consumption had been accurately calculated. The ratio of calories, sugar, fiber, and even pulp was perfect. As for the taste, it completely took care of his tough guy taste. There was nothing added. He raised his eyebrows, picked up the cup, and drank it in one gulp. He exhaled happily. "It's so exquisite, Mr. Fong. I can't help but want to do a few sets of anaerobic exercise to relax. Then I'll prepare supper later. There's a special area in the basement. Please feel free to use it." Fong Shu smiled and changed the plate. After serving the tea, he turned and walked into the kitchen. I miscalculated. The old man lowered his head and rubbed his belly. He felt that his intake today had unknowingly exceeded the limit. It was really terrifying when he looked at the students in front of him and his students. He couldn't help but shake his head. With such a person around, it's no wonder you two are fed like pigs. He wiped his mouth and put down the tissue in his hand. He finally looked up at Huaisha and Yuan beside him. "This little girl is your student?" He glanced at Yuan's hands and bones and nodded casually. "She's not bad, but her level is still not good enough." As for Forrest Hutt, he didn't even look at him. Forrest Hutt didn't dare to be angry. He just instinctively shrank behind Huaisha. "You can't see me, you can't see me, you can't see me." It wasn't until now that he realized that this old man was the monster in the Orchard Gym. In the legends, he was the ruthless man who killed his master and destroyed his ancestors with a single punch when he was extremely angry. The 12th uncle of the little house in the woods was killed by this old man when he was causing trouble in India. He casually squeezed. It was like squeezing a chicken to death. Why did he come to the capital? Little 19 trembled. His ostrich-like attitude made Elder Luo's expression more and more unhappy. No, why sure? He frowned and said, if this was in the past, you would have been kicked out of the sect. Times have changed. Everyone has their own ambitions. Why force yourself? Huaisher picked up the spoon and stirred the coffee in the cup, blocking the view of the small house in the forest. Mr. Luo, since you've come to the inner circle of Danbo, I've brought my students to entertain you with great hospitality. I've invited you to a meal and arranged accommodation for you, hoping that you'll feel at home. I can understand that old people have bad tempers, but there's no need to do this, right? He raised his head and asked seriously, did I do something wrong? Not at all. As a student, you've done quite well. Not bad. Why sure. I fully feel your respect and politeness. Elder Luo paused for a moment and spread out his hands with an innocent look on his face. So, as a teacher, I have to do my part, right? If I can't see the shortcomings but don't say it out and only care about my face, what kind of teacher am I? Huaisher sighed and raised his head to drink the coffee in the cup in one gulp. He put down the cup and slowly stood up. Since you're so interested, why don't you give me some advice? He moved his neck and fingers, making a crisp sound of joints rubbing against each other. He stared at the old man behind the table, wanting to beat up the old man who took advantage of his seniority. Elder Luo raised his eyebrows slightly. Your body, is it okay? I can move for the time being. You don't have to worry about it. Huaisher asked with concern, but what about you? You're so old. It's not good to sprain your waist, right? Protein hurts the kidneys. Is it convenient for you to go to the toilet every night? An empty nest old man with no one to take care of you must be having a hard time, right? Do you want me to hire a nurse for you? Dead silence, a long dead silence. Lin Shurju swallowed his saliva subconsciously, and his hair stood on end. He felt as if a volcano had risen in front of him, brewing boiling heat flowing under the earth, and was about to erupt with destruction. A shadow of horror covered his face, making his soul and the stigmata tremble. When he reacted, he, Yuan, and even Raymond, who was watching the show, had already shrunk to the corner, staring at the two figures facing each other across the long table. They felt a substantial, no, a murderous intent in the air. Very good. Why sure. You're very energetic. Elder Luo slowly grinned, and countless muscles squeezed each other, forming a loving smile. In order to repay your love for me, I'm going to beat you until you can't move today. He said, it's time to make up for the lesson. Come on, Baldy. Huaisher sneered. I've even fought against the elements of destruction. I'm not afraid of you. Both of them pressed their hands on the table, and their eyes stared at the opponent in front of them. In the silence, suddenly two sounds broke out like the tide. Then, the same terrifying temperature emerged from the two's bodies, followed by completely different colors. One was livid, and the other was burning red. Their hearts beat like a drum, turning their blood into a tide, and urging every inch of power in their limbs and bones in the most violent way. Overload. Both of them grinned at the same time, and their bodies suddenly shook, and then stopped abruptly. A sharp gaze was cast from the kitchen. Young Master and Mr. Luo. The old man in a yellow electric mouse apron stuck his head out. Please go to the basement to fight. In the awkward silence, Huaisher's face twitched, and he nodded obediently. Okay. There was a special training space in the spacious basement. Lin Shurju sat on a chair and looked around in surprise. He felt that the changes here seemed to be constant. The last time he came here, it was full of all kinds of strange instruments. Now, such a large, empty area had been cleared out. Yuan raised her hand expressionlessly and hit him on the head to keep him awake. Raymond had already picked up his phone and was ready to record a video. Opposite Huaishur, the muscular old man had taken off his jacket and pants, leaving only a pair of elastic shorts. He was leisurely moving his body, stepping on the ground barefoot, and testing the hardness of the ground with satisfaction. Then he hooked his finger at Huaishur. "What are you waiting for? Huaishur?" He said, "Come on." Huaishur silently looked at the muscular old man opposite him, and suddenly he didn't want to fight. It was too greasy, and he didn't want to get close to him. "There's a little girl here. Can't you pay attention to your personal image? It doesn't matter." Elder Luo put his hands on his knees, moved his neck, and turned 180 degrees. Suddenly, he looked back and grinned. "As long as I beat you uglier than me, it'll be okay." At that moment, the inverted, ferocious, smiling face approached instantly. His muscles turned blue, and he instantly entered the state of exceeding the limit. Pure and terrifying muscle strength broke out at this moment, breaking through the air. "Drummer!" A dull collision. Sound rang out. Huaishur's eyes widened. When he reacted, he had bent down, and a fist mark appeared on his back. The blast spread out from the explosion point behind him. In an instant, he was suffocated. It was too fast. When the two sides had a tacit understanding, abandoned the holy mark and other blessings, and stayed on the same level, the huge gap between their skills was highlighted. One was in the sky, the other was on the ground. Huaishur even suspected that he was in the basement of the 18th floor of hell, and he couldn't see the gap between them. But this didn't prevent his body from instinctively fighting back. In an instant, the hand of steel had already grasped Elder Luo's right hand while twitching. His left hand had been raised, clenched, and aimed at the old man's temple and smashed down. Triple thunderbolt, skyfall. From the high-speed camera of Raymond's mobile phone, he could almost capture the muscles on Elder Luo's face gradually rippling under the huge impact. His facial features were distorted, and blood oozed out of his mouth and nose. He looked more ferocious. Suddenly he grinned. Then Huaishur's body suddenly rose into the air, and the two thick arms hugged his waist. He was pulled up from the ground, and after drawing an arc in the air like a rag, he smashed to the ground. Bang! A hurricane swept across, but there was no big pit on the ground. Huaishur's body had already rolled and bounced with the support of his arms and legs. He instantly retreated a few meters and lay on the ground. The skin on his arms cracked and bloody. He propped up his body and moved forward. Sprint. Like a human cannonball, he charged forward with the support of Yu's step. Perhaps he could use Iron Mountain Lean to describe such a move, but the posture was completely different from Iron Mountain Lean. At best, it was a natural reflex formed by the body after countless fights. The floor under Elder Luo's feet cracked. He stood still. His hand grasped Huaishur's iron fist, and he seemed to be stunned. If it was in the past, not to mention such a smooth counterattack, Huaishur would have been paralyzed by him. "You've improved, Huaishur," he exclaimed softly, and then his smile became more mocking. His experience had increased, but unfortunately, his skills had not kept up at all. The 5 fingers holding the iron fist suddenly closed, and sparks burst out from the friction with the steel. He firmly clamped down on him, then raised his thick arm and smashed it toward his head. Elbow strike. Huaishur took a step to the right and dodged the elbow that could pierce through gold and iron. But then Elder Luo changed his move. On the arm that was chopping down, he raised his 5 fingers like a knife and slashed toward his neck. It was blocked. Huaishur raised his left arm, and his wrist blocked the hand knife that was chopping down. Then He counterattacked along his wrist. It was also a hand knife. The hand knife that was infused with the strength of the drum hand was no different from a steel blade. If it was someone else, they would have been cut open from the wrist to the arm in an instant, but only a straight white mark was left on the muscles that had tightened and turned black in an instant. Elder Luo's arm shook like a steel pillar, and he broke Huaisher's counterattack posture and launched another attack, under the suppression of each other's arms. In this space that was less than half a step away, the two arms carried a huge force, and they were almost fighting for their lives without mercy. In the fierce intertwining, Huaisher suddenly raised his head, aimed at the old man's smirking face, and smashed it down. This was the iron head that had faced the destruction element head-on. Bang! With a loud bang, both of them fell away at the same time. But the moment Huaisher stopped leaning back, he saw the iron fist in front of him. Push! He retreated and retreated again until he was forced to the wall, and there was no way to retreat. The iron fist was still hovering in front of him, wrapped in the power of thousands of pounds. It only needed to be pushed forward, and Huaisher would be like the legendary magician who couldn't accept scientific theories. His head would explode. The outcome was clear. 60 points. Elder Luo maintained his original posture and told him, "Huaisher, you passed." Huaisher couldn't help but laugh and wiped the nosebleed on his face. "Are you going to say that I'm the worst student you've ever taught?" "Not necessarily, but you're definitely the one who paid the least tuition fee." Elder Luo sighed. "What a loss." "Damn, I only charged you 100,000, but since you can still keep up with the progress, then open your eyes and watch." At that moment, the old man grinned and announced in a solemn voice, "The realm above the transcendent state." Chapter 807. "You're bullshitting." This was Huaisher's first reaction. It wasn't that he looked down on Elder Luo's skills, nor was it that he didn't believe that there were still things in this world that he didn't know about. Even if Elder Luo were to tell him about a 3,000-word setting, he would still be able to accept it. However, this was the only thing that he found hard to believe. The realm above the ultrastate. This was a false proposition in itself, because the ultrastate was already the upper limit. It had nothing to do with one's strength. The ultrastate was an excellent skill that could be used all the way up to the 5th tier, but the problem was it was a combination of one's origin substance and physical body. It was like overclocking a CPU. You've already overclocked it, so how could you overclock it again? Weren't you afraid of burning the machine? The reason why it was called the ultrastate was because it was a realm that had already surpassed the limit. Now that he had surpassed the ultrastate, whether or not this kind of doll-like method was reasonable didn't matter, but what was the difference between that and the ultrastate itself? It was still within the ultrastate's range, just to a different degree. You don't believe me? Elder Luo laughed mockingly. That's right. It's precisely because you don't believe me that you can't touch its edge. That's not reasonable at all. Elder Luo, you know what I'm talking about. Huaisher replied seriously. Reasonable? Is that thing even useful? Elder Luo's strange laughter became even more ear-piercing. If everything has to be reasonable, then nothing you want to do will work. Sometimes, if you want to succeed, you have to unreasonable. In that instant, an ear-piercing explosion rang out. Huaisher suddenly felt a sense of impending doom. Sweat poured down his back. He saw Elder Luo's iron fist push forward. Matter lost its outline. Everything collapsed in front of his eyes like bubbles. What replaced it was the terrifying light of 100,000 suns exploding at the same time. It swept out in all directions, swallowing everything. It broke through the floor, tore through the earth, broke through the ceiling, and shook the sky. The pure power turned into a tidal wave, surging forward in a straight line. It was like a surging tide, swallowing him whole. Huaisher's body instantly lost its senses. Then, he seemed to see his own body being ignited by the mighty stream of light, burning and turning into charcoal. His face slowly cracked and peeled off. Countless ashes merged into the wind, revealing his hideous bones. In the end, the skull completely evaporated along with the body. He disappeared without a trace. But when he came back to his senses from the terrifying illusion, nothing seemed to have happened. The iron fist was still very close to him, and only the remaining fear and despair in his limbs and bones were still surging, suffocating him. He was drenched in sweat. In the video, Huaisher seemed to have been bewitched at that moment. His face was pale, and he was frozen in place. His eyes became dull, and he seemed to have lost his soul. Only the people present could feel the terrifying power that flashed through the old man's body in that instant. It was a terrifying miracle formed by the convergence of pure power. Destruction, pure destruction. The Bhagavad Gita said that, at this moment, he seemed to have become death, the destroyer of the world. In the dead silence, Huaisher stared blankly with his eyes wide open. His body slowly slid down the wall, unable to stand up. His hands were trembling. If Elder Luo had really thrown that punch, he would have really died. He would have died without a complete corpse. Do you feel it now? Elder Luo slowly retracted his fist and laughed mockingly. This is the punch that knocked the king of heretics down into the abyss. It's the pinnacle of pure skill. How did you do it? Huaisher couldn't believe it. He couldn't understand. How did you explode with so much power at that moment? If Huaisher's daily full-strength punch was 10, then Elder Luo's output could be at least 80. However, the terrifying pressure that Huaisher felt at that moment was no longer 800. It couldn't even be described as 8,000. 80,000? 800,000? Or more? It's very simple. Huaisher. Elder Luo thought for a while and said seriously, it's like when you train, lactic acid will accumulate in your muscles. You just need to accumulate this strength and lactic acid during your training. Over time, dripping water will wear through a stone. 1 brick a day. One day, you will also have your own pyramid. Huaisher's anger was almost gone. What nonsense is that? Of course, I'm serious. Am I joking? Elder Luo looked at him doubtfully and said seriously, this move is like that. The principle is clear. That's why it's called supreme lactic acid accumulation. What's the difference between this and senior sisters taking advantage of the wind and taking advantage of the blade? Huaisher refuted angrily. However, his words stopped abruptly. He couldn't even say the last word, don't. Was there a difference? There was no difference. Similarly, they all sounded completely nonsensical, and there was no feasibility to speak of in terms of goddamn tricks. However, they were all used in front of Huaisher. It's as if the world has been distorted, right? Elder Luo laughed strangely. Huaisher, you've created so many miracles with your own hands and done so many impossible things. Why can't you believe that people can create miracles? He raised his palm and waved it at Huaisher. His 5 fingers clenched into a fist. However, this was his miracle. The state of exceeding the limit is also just a stepping stone to drummer this path. And use steps are just years entry-level of training and pain that were separated from the stage of limit, exceeding recognize the limit, and then deny the limit. Elder Luo said, this is the threshold to supreme. Huaisher looked at him in a daze. He couldn't react. It was too magical, causing his brain to shut down. What was the difference between this and magic? However, what was the difference between the magic of the past and the technology of the present? It was just that one was the law of the gods, and the other was the law and framework established by countless scholars. However, This was completely different from the scholar's law. The scholar's law needed to be projected on the silver ocean. Through this unparalleled power of wisdom as the source, it was finally implemented through the power of Zarathustra's great mystery. At this moment, the so-called supreme that Elder Luo displayed, Huaishe widened his eyes. Have you finally realized it? Huaishe? Elder Luo grinned. As expected, you're not so stupid that you can't be saved. It's just like that. The so-called supreme is not relying on external objects. It's through the user's training and the iron will of the only soul that forcefully implements the law on matter, through a person's power and will to distort reality, forming a magic that belonged to only one person. Isn't this a little too exaggerated? Huaishe still couldn't accept it. Using a soul's will to modify the matter in front of him, this, to a certain extent, it had already reached the realm of the creator, right? Even if it was just a little bit, a part, although there are parts of it that conform to the rules of matter. In the end, this power itself is unreasonable. It doesn't conform to the common sense of ordinary people and the rules of the Silver Ocean. Elder Luo said, you have to believe in it. It doesn't matter even if you're the only one who believes in it. What do you children say again? He pinched his chin and thought for a while. Then he smiled. The heart of belief is magic. With one soul, deny the reality in front of him and modify the matter in front of him through his own mind. No matter how small the modification was, it could still create a jaw-dropping result. It felt like walking to the right, while walking to the left could avoid the attack. Then, the opponent would definitely not be able to hit him. As long as he could seize the opportunity, not only could he take advantage of the wind's inattention, he could even take advantage of the iron's inattention. If he could take advantage of the air's inattention, he would definitely be able to hit the opponent, no matter how long the distance was. Therefore, if the lactic acid could be accumulated, then it would be no problem to store this power in the muscles like a deposit. Among 100,000 practitioners, perhaps 10,000 people could learn the skills of the drummer and use steps. However, only 100 people could reach the realm of exceeding the limit. However, among these 100 people who exceeded the limit, there might not be one who could reach the final goal. There was no need to seek inspiration through the accumulation of knowledge and research of scholars. There was also no need to search for miracles in hell like alchemists, as long as he believed in himself. He believed in himself more than anyone else. Even if the whole world was standing opposite him, everyone would deny it. As long as he still had a fist, he would wave it. He had to defeat pain, despair, and all the enemies in front of him. He even had to defeat fate. This boundless and inflated determination was the so-called supreme tier. Hey, that brat from the Eye of Nightmare. Elder Luo glanced sideways at Raymond, who was watching the show in the distance. Your tide-slaying posture is quite standard. What's your relationship with Avery? It's my master. Raymond's expression twitched. But my relationship with him isn't very good now. If you have a grudge with him, you can settle it with him. Elder Luo shook his head indifferently. If it's him, I remember that he should have something similar, right? Yes, but my master doesn't call it supreme. Instead, he calls it beast soul. Raymond scratched his face and smiled bitterly. But I'm not very talented and can't get started. That's normal. His method doesn't suit you. Elder Luo pursed his lips. You can't learn it even if you want to. At this level, forget it. That kind of pity was undoubtedly shown, but Raymond didn't even dare to be angry. He could only nod his head vigorously. You're right. Huaishe had experienced the supreme of the Eye of Nightmare's great Azura Iverson before. It was different from Elder Luo's technique. It was a constant state that could be maintained for a long time without needing to be activated. Simply put, It was an unreasonable sure hit. When the sword slashed down, no matter how the opponent ran or dodged, there was no way to stop the sword blade. He had to block it with his own strength. If he couldn't block it, he would die. It was this incomparable confidence and arrogance towards one's own power that forged the foundation of this supreme tier. As for the other, Elder Luo glanced at Yuan Yuan. Weren't the Yuan family's righteous blood and loyal heart the same? It was even more exaggerated than the others, directly locking their HP. So, do you want to learn it? Why, sure? In the silence, Elder Luo lowered his head to look at his face and smiled kindly. Although you might not be able to comprehend lactic acid accumulation, there must be a more suitable supreme for you. If you want to learn, I can teach you. Chapter 808. In the silence, Huaisher was not in a hurry to respond. He just looked up at him. He was full of curiosity. But what's the price, Mr. Luo? He asked seriously. This time you didn't even take the money, and you even delivered the goods to my door. I'm a little nervous. Can you feel at ease if you take the money? Huaisher? Elder Luo looked down at him. There was no teasing or mocking on his face, as usual. Instead, he was confused. Do you really think that what you learned can be bought with 100,000 yuan? He had taken advantage of the orchard gym. From the beginning, he even tried to kidnap the front desk of the gym. It was unforgivable, not to mention 100,000 yuan. If it was any other time, Elder Luo would have given him 1,000,000 yuan with a punch. How could he give him something as good as the Xiang Dragon? There were so many people who graduated from the orchard gym, but how many of them had achieved as much as Huaisher? Although the old man said that he was disgusted. And in fact, he was disgusted. He still helped him get rid of the accumulated problems and rebuild his foundation. He also taught him all the tricks of the U-footwork and the drummer technique. Even if he had to learn the rest by himself, his master still had to show him the ropes first. The favor owed was not small. Now that Elder Luo came to ask him for help if he did not teach Huaisher Supreme, how could Huaisher not do his best? Okay, Huaisher sighed. As long as it doesn't violate the rules of the martial arts world, forget it. It doesn't matter if no one knows about it, as long as I have some conscience. Then deal. Elder Luo asked. Deal. Huaisher sighed and tried to stand up. He was about to ask him how to teach, whether there were any new ways to torture him this time, and how long it would take for him to learn how to do it. The old man who received the reply nodded and raised his hand. When he stood firmly, he raised his hand and aimed it at his face. A punch with all his strength. Indescribable compassion and anger filled that face. It was unknown whether it was joy or anger, coldness or compassion. Even the bulging muscles all over his body became indescribably solemn. The incomplete light well behind him was fleeting. It made him look like a Buddha. Just like that, she aimed at his face. Before he could react, her fist had already landed on his face. He smashed him into the wall and couldn't get him out. Again, Huaisher only had enough time to think this before he felt the surging origin substance enter his lungs. The origin substance suddenly expanded, creating a massive wave that exploded. He felt like he was about to crack, 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 boom. His vision turned black, and he entered the third-person perspective again. It left its body and fell into the deepest part of the darkness. At the last moment, he only saw Elder Luo's figure, but it wasn't the burly and old body of a mortal. Instead, it was the ferocious appearance of a three-headed, eight-armed man burning with endless blood flames, holding a treasured vase, a treasured sword, a Vajra pestle, a golden bell. It was clearly so ferocious, yet it possessed the 32 faces. It filled the universe and controlled the universe. The mighty thunder exploded from the deepest part of his soul, turning into a solemn praise that sounded like the voices of countless people overlapping. Those who see my body will have the heart of Bodhi. Those who hear my name will cut off evil and cultivate good. Those who hear my Dharma will gain great wisdom. Those who know my heart will become Buddha. This was a wake-up call. Huaishur finally cracked. Dead silence, dead silence, dead silence. In the long silence, Elder Luo slowly retracted his fist and let out a long breath. His stomach rumbled with hunger. He was hungry again. It was obvious that he had used up a lot of energy. Such a method that was like pulling up seedlings to help them grow could only be used on people like Huaishur, who were just one step away. Otherwise, other people wouldn't be able to withstand it. Their souls would probably have dissipated on the spot. All right, he will probably sleep for about half a month. Let him stay there. It's best to leave him alone. Seal the basement and don't let anyone in. Elder Luo shook off the sweat on his body and turned to look at Raymond and the phone in his hand. He reached out his hand. Raymond hurriedly bent down and handed over the phone. He let Elder Luo close his fingers, crush it, and turn it into dust. He only prayed that this old monster wouldn't think that someone had peeked at his sect's secret teachings and would crush them to death. Do you understand? Elder Luo asked casually. No, I don't understand. Raymond wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. Oh, you have to pay even if you don't understand. 1 million USD. If it's 1 cent less, I'll ask your teacher for it. Elder Luo glanced at him and turned to look at Yuan. What about you? I don't understand. Yuan shook her head. Elder Luo looked at Lin Shurjo. Lin Shurjo trembled and nodded. I don't understand at all. 3 guys. One pretended not to understand. One understood a little, but humbly said that he didn't understand. And the last one was the most honest. He really didn't understand at all. Anyway, he didn't mind. He would learn as much as he could. Being able to see this punch would help him break through Supreme in the future. How did Huaishur teach you? Elder Luo asked. Yuan said, piano and swordsmanship. Lin Shurjo looked helpless. Cooking and working, he knows how to teach according to the students' aptitudes. He didn't become a teacher for nothing. Elder Luo nodded and looked at the two again. He waved his hand and said, your teacher will rest for half a month. I'll take over his lessons during this period. Don't practice the piano anymore. As for the gang, it's okay to leave them alone. I'll help you to rebuild your foundation. Don't get cleaned up by the old man when you come to hell. Yuan opened her mouth to say something, but she didn't object in the end. Little Shurjo nodded like he was pounding garlic. One felt that this was a rare opportunity. If they couldn't practice the piano, they could make up for it later. The other simply didn't dare to object. No objections? Elder Luo asked. No. Lin Shurjo said first. We're both in agreement. Oh. The old man nodded. He didn't expect things to go so smoothly. After thinking for a moment, he took out something from his pants pocket like magic. He shook it and handed it to the two. What's this? Lin Shurjo rubbed his eyes, confused. A POS machine. Don't you recognize this? The old man stared and said, seriously, don't try to learn from your bastard teacher and get a free pass. Get me a card first. Huaishur felt that he was beaten up by the old man. His consciousness collapsed. It was as if he had become a vegetable and was thrown into the darkness. Quickly, he was torn apart. 6, 7, 8. Even all his consciousness collapsed into fine crystals like dust. He was pushed to the edge of danger. But at the moment when his consciousness was about to be completely obliterated, the force disappeared again, allowing him to step on the edge of the cliff and return with difficulty. Gradually, his consciousness was connected again. But before he could finally be whole, the power hidden in his consciousness erupted once again, tearing him apart, once more turning him into countless fine dust particles that spread out. When he was about to completely lose consciousness, it allowed his instinct to reassemble his soul again. Then it exploded again. It was like endless torture, constantly pushing him to the edge of the cliff. He was a step away from the annihilation of his consciousness, but it indifferently allowed him to climb back again. Then it pushed him down again, just like Sisyphus who pushed the stone endlessly. Eternal cycle. It kept splitting his consciousness, but it didn't hurt his soul. It just allowed him to cycle in this endless torture. It was as if it wanted to completely cut him into the tiniest structure and violently squeeze out everything from it. In the illusion of a bang, he welcomed the collapse. But in the fine echoes that didn't exist, he completed the reassembly again. It split and closed again. Even his thoughts became intermittent, difficult to connect, and even fragmented, constantly jumping between the past memories and the illusory scenes. In the end, even the memories and illusions no longer appeared. Huaisha gave up thinking. A distant echo came to his ears. It was the roar of his consciousness collapsing and the soft sound of it reassembling. The distance was so far away, but gradually the distance between them became closer and closer. In the end, it seemed to be connected into one, turning into the endless sound of the tide. Come, go, close, distant, start, end, patter, bang, patter, bang. It formed the most basic 2 to 4 beats, as if it would never stop. But it was always like this. It was too monotonous. There had to be changes. Huaisha thought so. So, a new beat had to be added. For a moment, a brand new sound burst out from the dispersion and reassembly of the soul, inserted into the original rhythm, and gave it a new change. Strong, weak, second strong, weak. Now it was the 4 to 4 beat. Then, how about adding a new change? A new thing to break the old cycle and bring in new variables. So, in the interval of the 4 to 4 beat, a brand new beat sounded again. Huaisha found that he was beginning to adapt to such a change. He didn't know if it should be said that he liked it, but he couldn't help but be intoxicated by it. He was suddenly unaware of the passage of time. He forgot about the years. He was just immersed in this pure beat, allowing his soul to sing with it. Every part, every tiny composition, every part that belonged to Huaisha. Memories, thoughts, obsessions, pursuits, and wishes. Every time a new element was added, a new change would occur in this gradually complicated beat. Immediately afterwards, pain, pity, sorrow, anger, resentment. Countless origin substances collided, bursting forth with completely different sounds. It was as if flesh and blood were attached to the skeleton of the beat, causing a disorderly sound to appear in the deathly silence of the darkness. Division, reassembly beginning, end. This cycle, this growth, this change, after an unknown amount of time. In the end, a vast wave sprouted from the depths of the soul. In that instant, it unified, covered, and controlled all of the beats and sounds. Evolution. Finally, it turned into a magnificent sound. Symphony. In that instant, the divided consciousness was once again unified. Like a movement, it connected with each other and became a complete whole. When the power hidden in the darkness erupted once again, the waves it formed could no longer interfere with Huaisha's consciousness. It was like a gentle breeze blowing across his face. Just the operation of his consciousness caused it to dissipate into the darkness, never to be seen again. Huaisha opened his eyes. He had returned to the mortal world, Chapter 809. It was hard to describe that feeling. In that instant, he saw the sounds of growth, the earth, the sky, and death. Those distant echoes overlapped in one place, hidden in a place that no one could detect, but at this moment, they became so clear. They were almost within reach. It was as if he could see them if he raised his eyes, listen if he tilted his ears, interfere with them with his thoughts, and even touch them if he stretched out his hand. Bang! There was a loud explosion. The old figure in front of him raised his arm and spread out his 5 fingers. He suddenly blocked Huaishi's palm and grasped the invisible air with all his might. In the midst of the explosion, sharp air currents spread in all directions. "Wake up, kid!" Elder Luo's mouth was still half full of steak. He stared at Huaishi, who still hadn't woken up, and asked vaguely, "Do you want to tear down the house as soon as you open your eyes?" Huaishi, who seemed to have woken up from a long sleep, subconsciously raised his hand and stretched out his palm towards Elder Luo. He didn't clench his fist. Instead, he loosened his grip and spread his 5 fingers, as if he was holding something, and gently pushed it forward. However, Elder Luo's expression turned cold. He raised his head and swallowed his lunch steak whole. His body turned ashen once again, exceeding his limit. Forward, punch! In that instant, Huaishi's pupils contracted. Her heartbeat, pulse, breathing, muscles pulsing, soul pulsing, origin substance rippling, sage insignia revolving. All of the rhythms were unified into one. Following his movements, they converged forward. Resonance! There was another explosion, and the entire basement suddenly shook. Countless clouds of dust rustled down. Elder Luo's movements came to an abrupt halt. He lowered his head and looked at his fist, which was right in front of Huaishi's palm. A crack had silently appeared between his thumb and forefinger. His eyes widened in shock. In that instant, all of the rhythms in Huaishi's body overlapped, as if they were following his will. In that instant, they exploded with power that was far greater than before. Twice, 3 times, 5 times, or 10 times. Unbelievable. Why is it so weak? Elder Luo asked, in confusion. His disappointment was indescribable. Just this dam? It was as if he had planted an apple tree, but all it produced were cherries. It shouldn't be like this. The so-called supreme tier should not be something so mastery of symphony and easy to describe. Thunder burst forth. Elder Luo's body slowly clenched into a moment. He lost control of his body. The rhythm that had been condensed into a single beat. The crack between his thumb and forefinger spreading out with suddenly spread. Countless chaotic bodies spread out along with the even his muscles, the bones, internal organs, and tendons were all covered pierced with fine Elder Luo's own heart gushed out, breathing, suffocation, and origin substance. If it was an ordinary fusing person, together to form a violent they would have been turned into a bloody mist in an instant. However, in that short moment of stagnation, Huaishi was in an even worse state. Continuous cracking sounds came from his body. Intense pain burst forth. He opened his mouth and spat out large mouthfuls of blood. In the short moment of silence, Elder Luo raised his eyebrows and couldn't help but shake his head. The bloody wounds and internal injuries on his body quickly closed and disappeared. He laughed mockingly. "Idiot!" The old man gloated. "You don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. You actually dared to compete with me in terms of toughness?" Although he didn't understand what the effect was, he had already understood the principle and medium of Huaishi's supreme tier through that brief moment of contact. By harmonizing with one's own rhythm and forming a resonance, one could erupt with power far greater than before. This was just the most basic application. Then, using this resonance as a medium, it was directed to the outside world. He could even use this to interfere with the frequency of other living things. Through resonance, he could directly connect the two into one, ignoring the opponent's defense and transmitting destructive power to the opponent's core, then completely exploding. It was just like what Huaishir had done just now. Unfortunately, he encountered a monster like Elder Luo. He was actually injured by the reverberation of his heartbeat. Fortunately, you didn't try to harmonize the frequency of other things. Elder Luo glanced at his miserable appearance and shook his head in pity. Otherwise, you wouldn't be like this now. Perhaps he would have died without a complete corpse. In just a brief moment of contact, he could already distinguish the terrifying potential of this supreme tier. Detection, attack, defense, restriction, and even high-speed movement. It was just like him, a standard jack of all trades. What shook Elder Luo just now was only the resonance between Huaishir's organs and the source substance in his body. This supreme tier could resonate with other things. This was the true core of the supreme tier, symphonic. The resonance of all things, the sky, the earth, the stone marrow hall, and even everything. Everything could be harmonized in one's own melody. It was as if they had temporarily combined into one, borrowing the enormous power of the outside world to attack with the crowd. Through the fusion of rhythms, a different kind of unity of heaven and man was achieved. However, the price would not be so simple. Not to mention how much experience and control it would require. With Huaishir's current weight, he might not be able to borrow much strength before he killed himself. Imagine if the rhythm of an entire manor went out of control and exploded in the resonance of the body. He would definitely die miserably, miserably, miserably. It was not easy to master a supreme tier, but in the end, it was this kind of technique that would kill him. In front of this strange development, Elder Luo could only show a hint of admiration in his astonishment, as expected of F*** King Yu. An hour later, Huaishir, who was wrapped in bandages, sat in a wheelchair, drooling. He was pushed into the living room, sucking on a straw and slowly swallowing the liquid food that Feng Shu had specially made for him. Anyway, he was very tough. With this degree of injury, under the premise that Elder Luo deliberately restrained his counterattack, he did not even need to call an ambulance. He could just heal himself at home. It would just take a little more time. In the end, before he finished the bowl of liquid food, a miserable figure jumped into his arms and cried, "Teacher, you're finally awake." Little 19, whose hair was disheveled and whose face was covered in blood, was already in tears. He hugged Huaishir's thigh and screamed, "Teacher, save me!" He did not know what kind of crime he had committed in the past few days that he had fallen to this extent. Huaishir was about to comfort him when he heard a crack. Little Hut in the woods was stunned for a moment. He felt that the thigh he hugged had bent into a strange arc. He was stunned, and could not hide his admiration. He suddenly cried and praised, "Teacher, did you awaken some rubber fruit ability? You're the one who broke my leg." Huaishir rolled his eyes and was about to cry. He was angry. "Evil disciple, let go. It hurts." After a flurry, Huaishir's leg finally returned to its original state. At least it looked the same on the surface. He even tied a wooden board to fix the position. Now, Huaishir was like a glass man, full of cracks, and would shatter with a touch. Just now, Little Hut in the woods almost killed him. After practicing hard for so long, he did not let old Luo beat him to death. In the end, he almost died in this ditch. "Tell me, how did I raise a traitor like you?" After that, when Yuan violently dragged him to the training grounds, no one pleaded for him anymore. No. Little Hut in the woods clung to the floor with both hands and cried in horror, "I have done meritorious deeds for Danbua. I have bled for Teacher. Teacher, speak. Why don't you speak? Teacher, why don't you move?" Unfortunately, until the end, Huaishir did not move as he wished. He did not move. He had been paralyzed in the wheelchair for 2 hours before he finally regained his breath. When the surprise of realization disappeared, only indescribable exhaustion and weakness remained. Fortunately, he still had some energy. Finally, he regained a little control. He raised his finger with difficulty and pressed it on the green plant in the living room with trembling hands. He took a big breath and finally regained his breath and let out a long sigh. Almost 1/10 of the vitality network in Damwa's inner circle was absorbed by him. And the wounds finally began to heal rapidly. The emptied blood reservoir was quickly recovering. "It's time to talk, Teacher Luo." He raised his head and looked at the old man sitting opposite him. "Why are you here?" "Don't worry, it's not for you. It's just in passing." Elder Luo sipped his fitness drink and tapped his fingers on the table in front of him as if he was patiently waiting for something. "You woke up at the right time." He said, "There will be a show to watch in the next few days." "What show?" Huaishur was puzzled. "Knife hunting." When he said this, Elder Luo's expression was as if he was talking about a carnival. Indeed, compared to that, the existence of the knife hunting was simply a carnival between the borders of Ingzhou. This was a festival that belonged to Yoshitaka. It was held once every 4 years. It was initiated by the dojo under the Sword Saint. Imitating the legendary deeds of the strange monk Bianqing, they opened the door of the dojo and allowed the disciples who had succeeded in cultivation to go out and search for masters to fight. It was like a hunt, with swords as the wager for victory or defeat. Only the disciples who had collected 100 swords could receive personal guidance from the Sword Saint and complete their apprenticeship as esoteric. The rest could only be nominal disciples. As for the guys who lost all their pants in the duel and even had their swords and swords taken away, they were simply expelled from the dojo. From now on, whether they would enter the dojo as a disciple of the Sword Saint or be reduced to a thug would depend on these short 10 days. Among them, there was no lack of cowards who bought other people's weapons at high prices to make up the numbers. But while hunting others, all the disciples of the Sword Saint also became prey. Because the requirement to receive personal guidance from the Sword Saint was only 100 swords and swords, it was not limited to the identity of the person who came. Even if it was a heinous person, there was no problem. Over the years, there was no lack of outsiders who defeated the disciples of the dojo and received the honor of meeting the Sword Saint. This was an open conspiracy from the dojo. Through the way of the knife hunt, they used external pressure to get rid of the people who were just there to make up the numbers, and then introduced new blood. When this day came, not only the disciples of the dojo, but all the samurai in Kyoto, no, all the samurai in Ingzhou, and all the outsiders who were interested in improving their strength were also sharpening their swords, looking forward to showing their talents. It could be foreseen that in the following period of time, Yoshitaka would become the Azura field of 100 ghosts once night fell. "That's a good idea." Elder Luo nodded and praised, "If you ask me, I think the orchard should also be like this, so that some people who only went to the experience class won't come out to make up the numbers. Let's talk about the matter. Can you not always be so sarcastic?" Huaishur rolled his eyes. "So? You want me to participate in the knife hunt?" In the short silence, Elder Luo did not speak. He only raised his eyes and looked at Huaishur in disbelief. It was as if he was looking at a pervert. Chapter 8:10. What's wrong? Huaisher didn't understand. Huaisher, do you often have violent impulses towards kindergartners? Elder Luo solemnly put on his reading glasses and advised earnestly, I know a good psychiatrist. Do you want me to introduce him to you? Can you stop insulting me? But that's because you're too wicked. Elder Luo shrugged and spread his hands, looking shocked. Look at what you're saying. What are you thinking? You want to participate in the knife hunt. What's your seniority? Why do you still want to bully children? When he spoke like this, he completely forgot how happy he used to be when he abused newbies. Huaisher rolled his eyes and suddenly felt ashamed and annoyed. I'm only 18. How is that bullying children? People and their physiques can't be lumped together. You used to be extremely
Was he telling them
angry.
to slap the dojo
Forget
in
it.
the face?
Let's not talk
and
about
compete
it.
with the sword
Anyway,
sage.
it's too
Cannon
embarrassing
fodder.
for you
Soldiers
to participate
crossing the
in the
river.
knife hunt.
Tool men.
I don't care about
A lot
losing
of things
people
popped
in the
up in
ivory
his
tower.
mind.
But you
Ahem.
better forget
200
about the
is a little
orchard.
too much.
It's not easy for me
coughed,
to open a gym.
thought for a moment,
The dignified
and said,
king of Donbla,
300
the
will do.
self-proclaimed
Before
ruler of
Lin
the capital,
Sergio could ask
lowered
100,000
himself to participate
questions
in the
his head.
knife hunt.
He saw
in the
his
training
teacher
hall.
give him a meaningful
He shouldn't
look.
lose face like
300
this.
for two
Even if it
people.
was fun to beat up children,
Huaisher continued.
he shouldn't do it in
No matter
broad
how you
daylight.
steal or rob,
Huaisher
you
didn't
can't
care.
miss a single
but
one.
Elder Luo also
You
wanted
understand?
to save face. Little
He couldn't make a
Sergio was
name
stunned
for
and
himself
then
like
nodded
this.
frantically.
Huaisher
His
suddenly
teacher
became angry.
not only
Then
reduced
why
the
are you
number of
telling me
100,
this?
but
When did I
also
say you
reduced
should
it
go?
to 2 people.
Elder Luo
in a
asked,
way,
slamming
it
the
reduced the
table
pressure
and saying,
on little Sergio,
let your two students
and also
go.
gave him a chance
If the master
to ride
has something to
on
do,
Yuan's
the disciple will
coattails.
do the work.
Immediately.
Otherwise, why
he
would he
breathed
teach
a sigh
students?
of relief. Only his
Huaisher
teacher was
stunned.
good in the world.
He suddenly
felt
so
that what
moved
Elder
that
Luo
tears
said
flowed
seemed
down
to make
his
sense.
face.
But
After the
something
two
wasn't
left,
quite right.
Elder Luo
After he
took a
became
sip
the
of tea
boss
slowly,
of the pyramid scheme,
and then looked
he
up
turned
at
over
Huaisher
and
with
began
some
to oppress the
dissatisfaction.
newcomers.
Wait,
Huaisher,
what if something
children will
unexpected
be
happens?
unreasonable if they are
Huaisher
spoiled too
let out a
much,
long sigh,
and they won't
and
be
retorted
successful in the
worriedly,
future.
This is a
There's
student
nothing we can
that
do
I
about
personally
it,
taught.
right?
No
Huaisher
more
shook
money.
his head
Get
indifferently.
lost.
When I was
then
a
it's
child,
okay.
I dreamed
Then,
that someone
that's
would
the
spoil
case
me.
with Blade Hunter.
In fact,
Except
I can't
for
do
my
anything
teacher.
about it.
No one would care about
After
a wild
dinner.
child.
Huaisher
Half
said
of my
to the two
achievements
students
today came from her pity.
Just treat
and
it
the
as
other
an
half came from
extracurricular
another
internship.
black-hearted woman.
Considering
who
your
often
age,
spoiled
it's time
me,
for you
she
two
thought for
to
a
come
moment,
out and
said
see the
seriously,
world. In
our
fact,
lives are
it's
number
not a
one,
big deal if
and the
people are
competition
spoiled.
is
At
number
most,
two.
They will
Don't
do
be
stupid
reckless
things on
if you meet a
impulse.
tough opponent.
And it doesn't matter
All
if
right,
they are
stop
not
nagging.
successful.
Elder Luo,
who was
sneered.
beside him,
Don't you
couldn't
spoil
stand
your
it
students
anymore.
too much?
He interrupted
Shouldn't
him
I?
and said firmly,
Huaisher asked.
Don't worry,
I
if
know
even
your
a
level.
teacher doesn't love
That
his students,
old man,
the
Sean
world is a
Quan,
little too
can make
cold,
100 of
isn't
them.
it?
You guys
Elder
just have to
Luo
make do
glanced
with
at
it.
him.
Each
and
of
then
you
looked
can
away.
make 200
But
of
after
them.
a long time,
Yuan
he couldn't
is
help
still
but
calm,
shake his head.
but Lin Sergio,
You are really
whose
a good
face
teacher.
is bruised and
Why,
swollen,
sure.
twitches.
What about you?
How did it double
Huaisher
with just a
asked.
few words?
I'm not. Elder Luo put down the teacup and didn't speak again. On the TV, the live broadcast of tomorrow's news came on. Huaisher sat by the window, lazily basking in the moonlight, as if he had become a plant. Next, it was up to the children's performance. Yomiuri, Yamasaka, the gorgeous Soravingzhou, under the illumination of countless neon lights. It was a scene of extravagance. This was the city of Evernight, just like the legendary kingdom of the Netherworld, where there was no distinction between day and night. Once upon a time, this was the place of exile of Ingzhou, but with generations of changes, it had become one of the largest trading markets in the entire Asian region. The lawless zone, monopolized by agents of all parties, was a tax haven for the rich. After getting out of the car, the boy and the girl with a mission stood on the street, looking up at the stars made of twinkling lights and the dark night sky above their heads. It was a hubbub. The knife hunt has been going on for 7 days. Hut in the Woods said, "We came a little late. It's okay." Yuan thought for a moment and said seriously, 2 days is enough. If you hurry up 1 day. She said, I'll take 200 and you take 100. How about that? I'll try to take more, and you don't just slack off. I don't want to slack off. Hut in the woods said helplessly, but I really can't beat them. What he said was true. The bruises on his face had not dissipated yet, and there was still a trace of iron light. That was Huaisher's silver blood medicine. In the past half-month, Elder Luo's old man's happy stick reappeared, and he built his happiness on the pain of his intergenerational students. Yuan was fine. Whether it was the Yuan family or Huaisher, the foundation laid for her was solid enough. After the style of performance inherited from Huaisher had taken shape, the rest was a lot of practice. In short, she was beaten by the old man 3 times a day in the morning and in the evening. In the middle, she ate and summed up the experience. Lin Shizhou was miserable. He was one-sidedly ravaged and tortured at the first sight of him. Elder Luo made the same judgment as Huaisher, rotten wood can't be carved. It was not realistic to expect this little brother to fight face to face, but it was too shameful, and it was inevitable that he would be kicked out of the family, so he had to find another way. He did not expect him to beat others, but only hoped that he would not be beaten to death. There was no hope of direct damage. It was fine as long as he ran fast. After giving up all the training as a drummer, he focused on the changes of U-steps. Lin Shizhou did not disappoint Elder Luo. Under the shadow of the old man's happy stick, he squeezed out all his potential and ran faster than Huaisher in the past. But this was not an escape competition. It was useless to run fast. At home, he relied on his teacher, but outside, he could only rely on his junior sister. In order to live and continue to earn money, it was not shameful. So, what are you going to do? He asked. Yuan thought for a moment, and suddenly asked, "Where's the busiest place here?" Lin Shizhou often ran here when dealing with the affairs of the Alliance. After thinking for a moment, he answered, 2 places, Central Avenue and Dome Square. Then Central Avenue, Yuan said. Lin Shizhou was stunned. Wait, don't you want to think about it? The Yuan family never considers the place when fighting. Yuan looked at him, picked up her piano case, and left. Half an hour later, in the busiest place of Central Commercial Avenue, in front of the bustling crowd, Yuan put down her piano case, raised her hand, and propped up the high chair on the road. She was like a wandering musician preparing to perform. It was just that the performance location was not the right place. It was at the intersection. In the middle, the girl in the gray skirt leaned on the chair and quietly stared at the cars coming and going, letting countless cars fly past her. She did not seem to realize how eye-catching she was, and did not know how much attention she attracted. "Little girl, this is not the place for you to perform." The patrolling guard walked to the side and reminded her, "You should not be here." "Don't worry, I will just sit for a while." Yuan replied, "Are you going to drive me away?" "Why, I am not a traffic police." The guard was too lazy to cause trouble, but if someone wants to interfere, they may not be so polite and may not, he thought for a moment, and seriously found an adjective, friendly. "Don't worry." Yuan smiled. "I am not afraid." The guard shrugged and turned to leave. Holding his sandwich for dinner, he stood not far from the intersection and opened his mouth to eat, not forgetting to take a sip of tea. So beautiful! The middle-aged man next to him leaned on the telephone pole and smoked, staring at the girl's gray skirt in the distance. He could not help but smile. "Are you not going to interfere?" The guard asked. "I don't care." The man who was supposed to be in charge smoked. "Why should I interfere?" "I thought she would hinder your business." "Nonsense! Such a beautiful girl sitting there is like a signboard, attracting so many people's attention. I can't wait for her to sit there for the whole night." The smoking man shrugged. "You see, good-looking people always have privileges." "Okay." The guard swallowed the salmon fillet squeezed out from the edge of the sandwich. ate the last 2 mouthfuls, wiped his mouth, and threw the paper into the trash can. He said, "You are in charge here." But other people may not be so polite. The guard said, "She looks like my daughter, but a little thinner than her. I am afraid someone will cause trouble for her." The smoking man was amused. If she doesn't want to cause trouble, why would she move a chair to sit on the road? She can handle it. What if she can't handle it? The man thought for a moment and said seriously, "I will handle it and pay for her to sit in front of our clothing store for a whole year." The guard could not help but roll his eyes. Under the neon lights in the distance, someone finally could not hold back. You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.